Sorry about that. I lost track of time completely. I was getting water, changing out of work clothes, that kind of stuff. Oops, wrong way. Hello everybody, it's Wednesday, and you know what that means? It's story time. For anybody who might be new, my name is Meshla. I am primarily an audiobook streamer. I write and read my own Star Wars fanfiction, and I've been doing so for about 25 years. And we are on stream number 2 of streaming for Starlight. Starlight Children's Foundation is a fundraiser that helps raise money for children who are undergoing cancer treatment, and it helps provide them with toys and books and just, toys, books, games. It just enables them to be a kid while they're dealing with all of that craziness. So if you guys are interested in learning more about that, you can use the ! Starlight command in chat, or if you would like to donate, you can use the ! Donate command. And I'll be talking about that periodically throughout the stream. I do apologize, I was actually looking for more information real quick. As you guys might notice, I'm rocking the braids again. My hair did actually get dyed. You kind of can't tell, but it is mildly purple. It doesn't show up very well because my hair is real dark, but it is purple, I promise you. If you're in Discord, you'll see picture proof. So I'm rocking braids again, and I'm wearing my Yoda shirt. Alright. Before I get into reading, I just want to pause and say thank you to anybody who's here that has donated to the campaign already. Thank you. It's very much appreciated. Every dollar helps. Even if you can't donate, your presence is appreciated in the stream. That's support enough. So thank you for being here. We are currently sitting at $230. My initial goal was $150. We crushed that on the first stream, so much appreciated. Thank you ever so much. So I have upped my goal for the campaign to $500. So let's see if we can get there. Alright. So last time we were reading, we stopped reading at chapter 17, I believe. So that means we're starting tonight with chapter 18. And I'm not sure how far we'll get. It depends on how long the chapters are. Alright. Let me get my stuff going here. Sorry! As you might notice, I did a lot of rearranging on my layouts. Was trying to get it to work with the Tiltify plugin and overlays. So let me know if that interferes with the closed captioning or anything like that. The closed captioning should be on the bottom portion of the screen. I don't know if you can move it around because it's not a Twitch plugin specifically. It's actually something running through OBS. So do let me know if you're able to see the closed captions. I hope they're helpful to you. I am trying to make my stream more accessible to more people. So that is something that I've started doing to hopefully help that. And our goal tonight is to actually go to 10 o'clock. So we're going to read at least 2 or 3 chapters, depending on where we are at 9 o'clock, and then, or 9:30, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about Starlight, and we're gonna. Please feel free to get comfy, get yourself a drink of water, coffee, tea, cocoa, whatever you like, get a blanket. Yeah, speaking of blankets. Sorry for all the noise. Oh goodness, that was loud. So sorry. Yes, my legs get cold, so I will periodically reach for a blanket and or a sweater. Alright. Okay. And before anybody asks, yes, I did my eye drops. Alrighty. Move this over here. Hey Tava, how are you doing tonight? It's good to see you. I also saw Shadow and Darling Sunshine and Wraith and Ajo. Lots of people this evening. It's good to see everybody. I'm just getting set up to actually start reading. Oh, I changed up my frosty tools a little bit. I was messing around with the different ones and decided I liked the grizzled war veteran instead of the film noir detective. So, I hope you're well tonight, Taba. It's good to see you. Alright, and 2 seconds while I change the music down a little bit. It's a bit louder than I was wanting. Alright, actually, there we go. Sorry. Suddenly have the pickups or something. Alright. So we're starting this evening with chapter 18 of the story called that I'm calling Train Your Daughter. Oh, awesome. Yes. Always good to spend some time learning new things. And definitely eating some dinner. That's really important. All that self-care stuff. Alright. Also, I apologize in advance if you hear the furnace. It is literally beneath my feet. There is nothing I can do about it. So, if you're hearing that, I do apologize. Alright. Chapter 18. The only way I see it is we try to take on a pack, Jared said as he looked at his chrono. We only have roughly 5 hours now, and we've got to field dress these things. A pack? Diva asked him. Didn't Master Card warn us about them when we first started training here? What choice do we have? Jared replied. We can't go around hoping to find a solitary one. Jared's right, Bran said to Davitt and Koya. We've got a better chance to find one who's a pack member, and we can let him call to his buddies to finish them. Merrin frowned and chewed on her bottom lip as she looked up at the moon's position in the sky. It was still dark out, but the moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the area. This will take some teamwork. Everyone has to pitch in with the skills they have. She shifted her bow from where it was slung across her chest, settling it more securely as she tested the edge of the knife she'd made with her thumb. How accurate are you going to be with those? Jared asked as he looked at the arrows. Merrin shrugged. I haven't had as much practice as I'd like with my father's bow, but I think I can be pretty accurate, she said after a moment, thinking of how she'd guided her knife and deflected the darts with the force during Ethan's trial. Jared nodded softly at her assessment and thought about it more. Okay, we need to see about getting the one first. The first thing we need to do is find a trail. It may take some time, but we have to find it. When we do, we'll see how to get their attention. Merrin, climbing up on a limb or something might be a good idea. The 4 of us can use the spears and the shorter sticks down on the ground. Merrin grinned at him and nodded, noticing the slightly confused looks from Bran, Davitt, and Koya. She'd have to tell them about it later. She looked further down the trail and closed her eyes briefly. There's a clearing ahead, she said, pointing. She was already selecting her tree as they drew closer to the clearing. There was enough space for them to move about. She looked to Jared once more before moving off towards her chosen tree. Jared began to notice the signs of an animal trail and knelt next to it, using the force to understand what animals may have used it. It was a remarkable combination that walked along here, but he got the general impressions that wolfhounds had been pretty regular along the trail. He gestured for Koya and Davitt to wait on the other side of the clearing, several meters away from the trail, while he and Bran started to follow the trail on the opposite side. For a moment, Merrin watched how he took charge. He was a natural leader, but he was the kind of person who didn't let it go to his head. He was encouraging and supportive when needed. With one more look towards the boys, Merrin found her tree. She stopped a few feet shy, tightening the straps on her pack and ensuring everything was secure. Then she took a few deep breaths and leaped with barely a rustle of leaves. A few seconds later, she swung up on the limb and set her pack down against the trunk as she readied her bow. Jared and Bran found positions along the trail and crouched next to trees to keep them out of sight. Jared sighed as he stretched his senses to see if one was nearby. The others began to follow suit, and soon Koya let them all know that he felt one on the edge of his senses. Jared looked in Koya's direction and saw him nod and point in the general direction. Merrin, too, was reaching out in the forest. There again was that same sense she'd felt a few days ago, that not human feeling. It felt raw. She could feel her pulse quicken at the memory, but she took some slow, quiet breaths to calm it as she readied an arrow, kneeling carefully along the limb as she lifted the bow to her cheek. Then she spotted the slight movement of the underbrush further down the trail. And there it was, the sleek charcoal gray fur rippling in the dappled moonlight that filtered down through the canopy, and she caught the faint glint of sharp teeth. Jared caught under her senses and adjusted his position to see the movement as well. "Be ready," he sent to the others. "Here it comes, Merrin. Are you set?" "Lek," was her short reply as she focused on the wolfhound, marking each of the boys' positions in her mind. The sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, flushing at a deep orange-rose color. It hadn't peeked over the horizon yet, but it did give them a bit more light, which made her job easier. She focused in on the wolfhound, dropping the tip of her arrow slightly as she led a little. "Okay," Jared told him. "David, I know you've enjoyed time outdoors, occasionally calling some of the animals to you. I want you to make a few of the calls you use to get the wolfhound's attention and make him pause. Merrin, aim for just behind his shoulders and wait for him to present you with a broadside if possible. We want him wounded just long enough to let out a call for the others. Everyone got it?" "Got it," he heard from David, preparing himself. "On Merrin's signal, David, make the call." "Understood," Merrin sent as she drew the bowstring taut again, watching the wolfhound closely as she continued to lead. She counted in her head. In, out, 3, 2, 1. "Now!" she sent, closing her right eye as she sighted along the arrow, centering it on the wolfhound's shoulders. David let out a few low grunts, imitating one of the many kinds of stag that wandered through this area. From his position, Jared saw the wolfhound pause and raise its head and ears to get a sense of what was happening. "Merrin, now!" She saw the creature turn slightly and let her arrow fly, guiding it with the force as it whizzed toward the target. With a wet thump, it struck just between the shoulders. The wolfhound yelped in pain, keening as it went down. "Now!" Jared said as he got to his feet and started running towards the wounded animal. Bran kept pace with him and saw David and Koya coming from the other side. The wolfhound made several angry and hurt calls as it writhed on the ground. It released a ferocious growl as Jared approached and stopped suddenly, spear at the ready. "We are sorry to kill you, brother," Jared whispered, citing the Katani tradition as he drove his spear into the neck of the wolfhound. David was next, and the animal let out a final howl before it dropped heavily to the ground and lay still. Bran and Koya came up then and looked over the animal. They had made their first kill. But there was still... Jared's senses flared, and he turned in the direction of the wolfhound had come from. Further back, he heard several more howls. "Can anyone count how many?" "They're too close together. I can't pick them out," Bran said as he crouched down. "But there are several of them, and they're heading this way. They must have been close." "And hungry," Koya added as he closed his eyes. "I sensed it in this one and stronger in the others. Oh, gods, Jared. They were on the hunt, too." "Can you see anything?" Jared called up to Merrin. Merrin's stomach twisted at Koya's words. Clutching her bow in her left hand, she moved further along the limb before she peered down the trail. She saw a movement, and then she felt it. The hunger. It made her blood run cold for a moment. She squinted, reaching out in the forest as she did so. "There's 4, she said, her mental voice tense. "Leave the other for now. We need to deal with these or will be dinner." She gripped her bow, raising it to firing position again as she nocked another arrow. "Oya," she said, using the old Mandalorian expression of solidarity, of brotherhood. 4, Jared whispered to himself. He knew he was taking a chance by going after a pack. This was just what he was picturing. They'd each have to handle one with Marin for cover, unless Marin took 1 or 2 out first. "Spread out," he said to the others, gripping his spear tightly. "Bran and Koya, back up just a little from Davit and I and fan out. They'll see the blood on our spears. We're the ones they'll try for first. See if you can flank them. If they charge, be ready to send a force hammer at one if you can." Marin nodded to herself. It was a good plan, if it worked. As it was, she had 5 arrows left. She frowned, tracking the pack as it came to the edge of the clearing. The rising sun made their gray fur glisten as if it were gilded in silver, and their teeth glinted. She could even hear the pack's heavy breathing as it scented the blood on Jared's and Davit's spears. "Get ready. I think they'll charge," she warned. She reached out in the force again, trying to distract 1 or 2 of them from the boys as she let an arrow fly. It zipped through the air, finding its mark as it buried itself in the neck of the wolfhound at the lead of the pack. Jared saw the pack leader fall from Marin's arrow. The suddenness of it caught the attention of the other 3, and he could see a possibility. "Davit, let's charge them," he said as he started forward quickly, with Davit right behind him. Bran and Koya hesitated momentarily, but Bran got an idea and motioned for Koya to run with him. The wolfhound that was off by itself hesitated longer than the others, and Bran threw his spear and guided it with the force to let it sink through the animal's chest. It dropped almost instantly as he drew a shorter spear and went to corner the 3rd, while Jared and Davit reached the 4th. Marin watched from her perch, readying another arrow, just in case. It was risky, but they were working well together. She only hoped it wouldn't bring even more to the area. She momentarily watched the boys, reaching out in the forest to check the surrounding forest for more lurkers. Davit attempted to feint with his spear, but the wolfhound did the unexpected and lunged forward instead of retreating, its teeth locking down on the wooden shaft and yanking it from Davit's hands. It tore it to pieces and crouched low, the hair on its back raised and a low growl emitting from its throat. Davit drew one of his knives that Jared had helped him make it with his right hand while his left pulled one of his shorter spears. He was almost ready when the wolfhound lunged at him. Jared knew he wasn't close enough to prevent it, but he ran towards Davit as the hound knocked him to the ground and moved into position to finish him. Surprised, Davit resorted to trying to beat the animal's head with his shorter spear. Koya and Bran were distracted by it long enough that the wolfhound they'd cornered took advantage and started to charge them. Marin watched, her stomach tying itself in knots with dread as the wolfhound Davit had cornered suddenly lunged. It was too close for her to get a clear shot, and with Jared sprinting towards Davit, she didn't want to risk it. Instead, she turned her attention to Bran and Koya. What she saw made her swear profusely, and she fumbled her arrow slightly before knocking it securely and drawing back the bowstring. It was hard to get a clean shot with how fast the animal moved, but she tried anyway. She counted in her head again, breathed in once, let it out, and then she held it as she released the arrow. It whizzed towards the wolfhound and missed, burying itself in the tree behind it. The whisper of the arrow passing by caught the attention of the charging wolfhound for just a moment. With the turn of its head and a slight change in the rhythm of its charge, Koya saw it and knew it was just enough to sidestep, which he did as he then tried to drive his spear into its side as it passed. It connected, which drew a howl of pain from the wolfhound, but the shaft broke from the force of the animal's momentum. Bran jumped out of the way and wasn't within range to jab with his shorter spear, but he threw it again as he did with his spear and trusted in the force as he guided it before. He saw it pierce the hindquarter, but the animal either didn't know it or didn't care as it continued before turning and starting to pace side to side with Koya's spear still in its flank. Jared reached the wolfhound that had David pinned and lunged forward, leading with his spear. He aimed carefully where he felt a gap between the ribs and felt his spear sink to where his hands kept a firm grip. The stone tip pierced through the other side and broke under the animal's weight, causing Jared to fall that way because of Jared's momentum. The impact dazed Jared, but he recovered, pulling his knife out and driving it deeply into the animal's neck several times. Weakened, the wolfhound was unable to move due to its injuries. I can't read today. Oh my goodness. Also, Bran and Koya had spread out on both sides of the wolfhound, making it more challenging to take them both. They only had a stone knife each, as Koya had not carried a shorter, sharpened branch. Jared, in the meantime, crouched next to David, the youth's left arm mauled from where he'd been defending himself from the wolf's attack. "I'm okay," David told him, keeping the pressure on his arm where he needed it. "Get that last one, Jared, so that we can get out of here." "Marin," Jared yelled as he got up and looked at Bran and Koya's situation. "How many arrows do you have left?" Marin checked her quiver to make sure her mental count had been correct. She had 3. She chewed her lip for a moment, taking stock of the situation. David was injured, and from the look of it, he'd need a healer. She shook herself. "I have 3 left." She drew one of her remaining arrows and readied it, wrapping her knees around the limb as she lay prone, much as she had when learning to use a rifle. She hoped it would give her a better shot since the angle wasn't as steep. Frowning, she wet her finger and held it into the breeze, testing the direction. There was a slight crosswind, but she hoped it wasn't enough to throw her shot. Carefully, she knocked the arrow and lifted her bow, pulling it to her cheek as she lowered her other hand slightly, dropping her aim. Bran and Koya were close to the wolfhound that was stalking them, but she figured she could still take the shot. She couldn't go for a headshot because of where Bran was. "Watch your heads," she called, trying to distract the hound as she sighted again before she released the arrow. Again, the arrow passed almost silently through the air, and she watched as it sank halfway into the animal's side. I'm going to stop there because we have an ad coming up in about 15 seconds. It's going to be a minute and a half, so take some time to get a drink of water, have a stretch, hug your kids, hug your pets, whatever you got to do. Yeah, I'm going to get a drink of water. Thank you for that posture check, Wraith. Yes. Have that snack, Wraith. And we're back from our ad. Thanks for hanging out, guys. I appreciate you. Alright. For anybody that would like to donate, you can use the donate command in chat, or you can use the Tiltify panel down in my About section. It's also down there. So if you'd like to, I would very much appreciate it. There we go. Just figuring out where we were. Brand saw the impact, and the wolfhound reared up from the pain. He looked closely and saw that the arrow had hit just like it had with the first hound they took, but it wasn't as deep. It may have injured the animal's lungs, but the heart was untouched. The wolfhound started to surge ahead and snap as he went, the pain driving it forward. Jared saw this and knew how it would react, having seen animals he'd helped hunt on his home planet many years before. He approached slowly, crouching. He couldn't escape the wolfhound's line of sight as the animal turned to keep the three of them in sight. Now they had it cornered in the center of their triangle. "Get your last 2 shots in," Jared called up to Marin. "He's not going to go down easy." "Lek," was her terse mental reply as she adjusted her position, checked the wind's direction, and pulled another arrow from the quiver across her back. "Keep your heads down." "Please," she called quietly as she knocked her arrow and set it on the shaft again, counting. 1, 2, in, out. She held her breath and shifted slightly to the left, aiming for the neck. And then as she released, keeping a close eye on the arrow and guiding it. A few moments later she grinned as the arrow buried itself in the side of the wolfhound's neck. It fell to the leaf-strewn ground, but it was still alive. She'd missed the jugular. "Now, before it gets back up," Bran said as he and Jared ran forward at the same time, Koya just a moment behind them. It wasn't long before they finished the last wolfhound, and now all 3 were slumped, sitting on the ground, trying to catch their breath. None of them knew how much time might have passed. Could it have been minutes or hours? "Well," Bran said as he laid back and looked up at the morning sky, "the hard part's over." Marin watched from her perch in the tree until the last wolfhound stopped moving. When it had lain still for several minutes, she gathered her bow and retrieved her pack, dropping to the ground. Then she went over to the boys. "I don't know how much time we have, but we need to field dress these things and get back to the Praxium. The sun had climbed above the tops of the trees a while ago." Jared nodded slowly, as the others did. Now came the messy part. Okay. Jarius checked his chrono as the time was approaching. He knew from Marin that all was well, but he didn't know how well. Stefan had the same feeling as he leaned against the table at the head of the main hall, looking at Jarius, then to Zan, Callista, and Andrea. "Andrea, Calica, no worrying over their injuries till we're all done here," Zan said. "I want them as off-balance as possible, and compassion right now would not be helpful." His face was a complete mask, his emotions buried. Callista's face bore a faint frown, for she could feel that the young people were exhausted, and at least one was injured. She traded a look with Zan, hoping all had gone well. She then sighed. "All right, but you know me." She hefted her helmet after a moment. At the same time, Marin felt Jarius' attention turn to her briefly. They were close now, though a little burdened with the 5 kills. They'd had to stop a few times and rest, but finally they came around the bend in the trail, spotting the open gate. "They're here," Stefan said to the rest as he looked up from where he was leaning and saw the first sign of them walking up the path towards the gate of the Praxium. "Well, well, well," he said as he noticed how many they carried. Jarius saw it and almost wanted to smile. "They exceeded your mark, Zan." Callista peeked over Stefan's shoulder and grinned momentarily before her face settled and she controlled her emotions. Privately, she'd been rooting for them and hoping they'd succeed. They had, and then some. Zan's expression didn't betray anything as he noticed the young hunters approaching. "Leave your kills there for a moment and stand forth." Stefan walked back into the hall ahead of the others and resumed leaning against the head table. Jerry stood by one of the columns, and Andrea stood next to her father. Mirren exchanged a look with Jared and the others before she set down her burden carefully, the others doing likewise before they stepped into the hall. They all looked exhausted, and Callista noticed one with his arm crudely bandaged. Zan looked at them dispassionately before speaking. I see you have brought back one more kill than specified. Care to explain why? Jared looked at the others before turning and bowing his head for a moment to Zan. I decided to hunt a pack instead of looking for lone wolfhounds, sir. We waited for one, letting it call the rest once we'd wounded it. The other 4 were close by. They were on the hunt. I see. And there were no females and cubs in the area? Zan asked, his voice cold and logical. None, sir, Jared answered. Only these 5 males. We didn't know until we'd already killed the first that they were driven by a great hunger. It was a hunting party. But no others showed up. Zan nodded. Why didn't you skin the carcasses rather than bring their bodies? It would have been more efficient. It is not the Katani way, Brant answered as he stepped forward. Tradition demands that if an animal is killed, it be for food. Just taking the pelt would have offended the people here. Mirren nodded in agreement. She learned as much during her time on Catan. Stefan nodded and smiled, glad that they had honored and respected the way of their hosts. Zan nodded again. And, Javet, your arm... Explain how that occurred, if you will. The wolfhound that Jared and I cornered surprised me. Instead of backing from my feint, it grabbed and it broke my spear, then lunged at me before I had pulled my extra weapon. So it was bravery, rather than miscommunication, that caused the injury? So you worked together as a unit rather than a bunch of individuals? Mirren nodded and shared a look with Jared. Alec, we did, and Jared helped keep us focused. I had Mirren take a position in the trees to be our eyes for their approach and take any shot she could with her bow, Jared said. Jarius noticed that she still carried it with her as they'd walked in. The rest of us coordinated as the other 4 came in. Zane nodded and then walked towards the bodies of the wolfhounds. He looked at them for a minute or 2 and then said for the first time, as he broke a smile, Then you have all passed this test, and passed it remarkably. There was a collective sigh of relief, and Mirren grinned, pulling her bow off her shoulder to lean on it momentarily. Andrea couldn't help but smile as she looked at the young people. She could tell that any barrier between them now was torn down. Jarius nodded his approval in Mirren's direction and gave Jared a nod as well. He had seen the look the 2 exchanged at the news and knew what it meant, even if they didn't. Callista smiled, exchanging a look with Jarius as well. She could tell that he was proud of Mirren and all of them. She wanted to look at David's arm, but something told her Zan still had some plans stuffed up his gauntlet. Zan knelt beside the bodies. It's good that you honor Katanu tradition in this hunt, but another tradition must also be honored since you have all taken part in a Mandalorian-style first hunt. And for that, a proper ritual needs to be followed. He looked to where Stefan was. That is, if you don't mind. Stefan nodded. To honor one without the other would be meaningless and insulting. Zan grinned. For this, we should take the bodies outside. And with that, he used the force to lift the bodies off the ground. This will be a little too messy indoors. As the young hunters trailed Zan outside, followed by the rest of the adults, he quickly set to work and skinned the wolfhound carcasses. Ooh, sorry. Itchy. For such delicate work, it was relatively fast, given the last cutter that Zan had built into one of his gauntlets. And in a short period, all 5 skins were complete. It is part of my culture, and whenever one undertakes a successful hunt that changes their life, they take a trophy reminding them of that success. You 5 now share that honor as well. He grabbed a skin, walking over to Bran and threw the skin over the young boy's shoulder. This day, you are warriors. He then proceeded to do the same with the other 4, giving a wink to Mirren and a slight shoulder bump to Jared when they received their skins. Mirren grinned shyly at him when she got hers, her gaze sliding to Jarius momentarily. Zan looked back at Stefan. I suppose we better get the kitchen staff to prepare these for food. Huh. Just make sure they have leave the hearts alone. Agreed. And in the meantime, Stefan added, we'll prepare a special dinner for this evening to honor your hunt. The wolfhound is a special animal, and great care is taken in preparing it. I believe that you four have earned a rest. Andrea, Callista. He looked at his daughter, an adopted daughter, before he looked over to Jared. When you are rested and refreshed, a horse will be waiting for you to take you to the house. I will want to see you in my study before dinner. Yes, Sensei, Jared replied with a deep bow, wondering what would happen now. Marin frowned slightly, but shrugged and headed over to Jarius. She spotted Callista headed over to see David, guiding the young man gently out of the hall and towards the medbay. Jarius walked over to Marin and knelt in front of her. Marin, you did a great job, and enjoy it. You've definitely earned this. Bran, Koya, next time you want a challenge, find me. We'll take one on together. Us and David, of course, Zan said, grinning at the former troublemakers. Bran grinned with a new respect, tempered with some humility. Yes, teacher. Koya bowed. We have a lot more to learn. Zan smirked. So do I, lads. That's part of the fun. And it's Zan. None of this master or teacher business for you. Marin grinned at the boys as she caught Zan's words before she answered her father. She buried her face in his tunic, surrounding herself with its scent. We did, and I think I have some new friends, she told him with a smile. Jarius and Stefan both laughed lightly at the comment from the students, reflecting on their previous conversation. Marin giggled at Zan's announcement and eyed Jarius briefly, knowing he preferred her to be polite. Jarius smiled warmly. I'd say you have more than just friends here. I'd say you found brothers in arms. Alec, she said softly, her gaze following David momentarily. She'd been the one who'd bandaged, there we go. I can't words today. She'd been the one who'd bandaged his arm. She realized then that she still had the bow clutched in her left hand. She brought it around and held it out to him, along with the one remaining arrow. Jarius took it in his hands, looking over the work that went into both of them, and then held them out for Stefan's inspection. Did the length and thickness look familiar? Stefan took the bow, hefted it, and started looking it over. Almost like an old war bow. Marin shuffled her feet nervously at that, her cheeks flushing. Zan looked closely at Marin. Kandosi! When I did this for my Vergotten, I only made flint knives. I'd never thought about a bow as such. Jarius looked over the arrow, noting its length and knowing where she knew it from. You remembered my war bow, he whispered. Marin's cheeks flushed. I just thought that maybe a longer-range weapon would be better. She barely caught Jarius's whispered words, and then she grinned at him and nodded. Zan looked at Jarius. I'd say that your daughter takes after you. At that moment, Callista re-entered the hall. She'd seen David to the medbay to get his arm taken care of. Her brown hair was loose from the close-fitting hood and flowed down her back over the deep purple armor covering her from neck to toe. She held her helmet in the crook of her arm as she approached the remaining young people. She then paused to hug Andrea and nodded to Stefan before leaning up on her toes to kiss Zan and lean against him briefly. And then she saw Marin and Jarius. She clipped her helmet to her belt and went to one knee. Nothing serious, I hope? Zan asked. Callista smiled. Naish, he'll live. The bones didn't snap, but it tore the muscles up pretty badly. He's in a back-to-bath right now, and I'll do a session with him afterwards. With a look to Jerry, she beckoned Marin over. Come here, Marin. Her voice was gentle, and she smiled as Marin left her bow in Jarius's grip. The young girl crossed to Callista, and she found herself faintly surprised when Marin gripped her arm in the traditional greeting. For a moment, Callista looked her over. It was evident that she was tired, but she was trying not to show it, and she was pretty excited about having passed Zan's test, and rightfully so. Callista squeezed her shoulder gently and spoke softly. Why don't you get some rest? You could use it. She winked. If you want, later I can show you a few simple healing techniques, she added with a knowing smile towards Stefan. Marin grinned and nodded, turning to hug Jarius again before she took her bow and bowed to the adults. And we're skipping scenes here. Sorry. It ate at him more than he thought it would have when he first heard the rumors from the Dug in Mos Espa, and he heard confirmation from Zan with his own ears. The Death Watch, he thought to himself as he sat in one of the Edmonton pubs. He had chosen a table in the back of the tavern with a single mug of ale on the table in front of him. He didn't know how to handle himself with this turn of events. That had been made known in the main hall of Stefan's Praxium. Jarius couldn't find calm as Stefan wanted him to. He'd already tried, alone with his thoughts in a clearing in one of the forests nearby, and attempted to use the techniques the Jedi had taught him, but to no avail. He couldn't find peace there, and solitude at the pub with his ale wasn't proving any more helpful. It was a long day. Not only was Zan dealing with the outcome of the hunt he sent the students on, but the Pargile needed significant work. Zan was kicking himself for leaving the repair work that long. Amazingly, the engines hadn't fallen apart after leaving hyperspace. So, 8 hours later, while Callista was busy looking over the medbay, Zan decided to head down to the local pub. Catan was unlike any other place that Zan usually frequented for tap calves. It was clean, for one. The other thing was that people were generally respectful. This is more like a library than a tap calf, he thought, as he sat down at the bar after ordering his usual Netrigal. However, a short while later, he looked around the bar and found a familiar sight. It was Jarius, sitting by himself. That was normal. What wasn't normal was the fact that he was glaring at his ale glass as though it owed him credits. Zane noted that his attitude had changed since the revelation of the latest Death Watch antics. Sorry. Zane grabbed his ale and tossed the barkeep a cred chip, which the barkeep juggled in surprise as the red-armored Mandalorian made his way to Jarius' table. It was somewhat puzzling that Jarius didn't notice his approach, but Zane put it out of his mind. I know it's not great Natragal, but at least these Aratize are trying, Norfald. Glowering like that won't make the ale taste any better. The taste isn't what's on my mind, Jarius told him as he looked up and gestured to the opposing chair. Your ability with the Force is better than mine. You know my thoughts. Zan sighed and sat down. Alec, that I do. And for the most part, I agree with you, Jarka. But there is a difference between Mandawad vengeance and vengeance born of the dark side. He raised an eyebrow at the other man. This does you no good, Nervald. I knew the latter before I knew the Mando path, Zan, Jarius said as he looked up at him, the pain clear in his eyes. Ever since Ethan and Stefan found me and stopped me on that path for vengeance, it's hard for me to keep it at bay sometimes. I look at America and see what my daughter could have been. Hard as I've tried. That pain has never left. Be glad you do not know it, and I pray you never do. Zan growled. You have a Dalkad, now. He let that sink in for a moment. Marin is more worried about getting your praise, attention, and love than she's worried about becoming Jetise. Your daughter's loss is tragic, but would she want you to sit in this darkness and affect others? Ones that are elite? Zan raised his voice a bit more. And another thing. Don't be so sure you have cornered the market on pain. Orebusi Kikovid. You know nothing about me, nor do you know about anyone else who is trying to break through this fair creep wall you've surrounded yourself with. Jarius sighed and nodded, finishing the last of his ale. You're correct, Zan. You must pardon an old fool's brooding. He called in Katani to the barkeep, motioning for him to himself and Zan before he addressed his friend again. I do need to remember that I do have Marin. That changes everything. He leaned back against the wall of the bar as the drinks arrived. How do you think she's fared with the Jetise? Zan nodded. Lucky for you, I'm as much of a fool as you are, Nervald, he said before smirking. You would do well to keep that in mind, Jarka. Daryam, with her performance today, I doubt she'll have any more problems here. She's gained even more attention, but this would put her near the top of the class. Stefan was impressed, which says a lot. Granted, she picks up any instruction I've given her quickly, Jarius confided. I've no doubt that Stefan and his daughter's lessons have been taken with the same energy and desire for learning. He laughed for a moment. And drive Ethan near mad with her performance in evading him as well as she did, and then finally countering his tactics. Zan laughed. I've heard. Ethan is still grumbling, but he's no longer angry. The Mirsheb can grumble all he wants, but Marin's skills today were more based on what you have taught her than what Stefan and Andrea have taught her. She said as much. She's more worried about your approval. Her place may not be here long, but that won't mean she'll not use her skills. Jarius nodded again as he took another sip. I realize I probably don't show her well enough how proud I already am of her, of everything she's been able to accomplish in such short time. And you may be right, but I don't know where her place will be or what path she'll take. I believe that in Andrea she'll have a great teacher. She spends a lot of time teaching Marin. Zan nodded. She's forging bonds here that will serve her well in whatever form her life's path takes. Andrea is a great influence, but you should look at the friendships she's formed, including those 3 boys who were one-time enemies. He paused and then looked squarely at Jarius. If she were older, I'd be giving Jared a bit of a fright, he said, with a chuckle. I'd watch their relationship closely, as well. Nervad, she's gaining a lot from him, also. Jarius chuckled. I've seen the look they shared in the main hall. They may not know how they feel yet, but I know it. Jared seems to be a young man of honor, but that won't stop me from watching him. She's too young for anything like that to happen right now. He shook his head. Shab, listen to me now. He finished his ale and ordered another round. And that's the end of chapter 18. I need a stretch. So, what do you guys think? I need a stretch. Hold on 1 second. Okay. Sorry, got distracted. Oh, sure, 1 second. 1 second. Let me swap over. Okay, that's, here, I think? Oh, yes. Yes. So, as part of our campaign for Starlight, I have come up with several incentives and several milestones that we can work towards. As you can see on the left-hand side, we have completed all of our milestones up past $150. And that leaves our next milestone at $300. Thank you, Wraith, for all the added milestones. Thank you for the ideas. They were wonderful. As for our incentives, for $1, which I believe is the minimum donation, you can unlock a special Discord role of S4S supporter, which is streaming for Starlight, or you can make me drink water. You can select which one when you make your selection before checkout. For $3, you can make me check my posture, because I am notoriously bad at that. For $5, you can make me put a bow in my hair. And we have 3 colors to choose from. We have white, we have lavender, and we have purple. For $10, you can add 10 minutes to our total stream time, not to exceed 11 p.m. Eastern. For $25, you can make me swap my character or loadout if I'm gaming. For $50, you can ask me anything related to streaming or my content. Sir Ajo, you still have a question to ask. For $75, I will write a one-shot. For those of you who are not familiar with writing, a one-shot is a scene, usually a standalone. It does not have to be tied to any particular story. It can just stand on its own. For $100 or more, you unlock VIP status in the channel for 1 year. And for a donation of $150, you can unlock some one-on-one writing coaching with me. And over here on the left, for our milestones, at $300, Sir Wraith is not allowed to make any sarcastic remarks for an entire stream. Let's see how long that one lasts. When we reach $350, I will create and play a SWTOR character of chat's choice. You get to name it and tell me and help me create them. When we reach $400, I will co-author one chapter of a Star Wars fanfiction from someone in chat. If we reach $450, I will help level one person's SWTOR character. And if we reach $500, I will co-author 2 chapters of a Star Wars fanfiction. And as a reminder, my schedule for the rest of the Starlight campaign is as follows. Give me one sec. So tonight we're doing Storytime. On Friday, which is not a day I normally stream, but I added an extra day. On Friday, I will be playing SWTOR. I have created a character specifically for this campaign. And then again on Wednesday, I will be playing SWTOR as well. Oops. Here we go. As a reminder, chat has not selected a game for me to play. Or they have also not selected a game for me to play with chat. It can be the same game. It does not have to be a separate game. I do have several co-op games, so we can talk about that at the end of stream if you guys are curious. So yes, I need to play a game with chat. So, be thinking about that, and we can talk about what I have in my Steam library. It could be SWTOR, it could be something else. I have several games that are not necessarily on Steam, but I have several games that are co-op, so we can take a look at those. Alright. There we go. Alright. So, any questions about any of that? That was a lot. Frosty tools. That's funny. We have an ad coming up, so just be aware. See you in a minute and a half. Bye, guys. Should be starting any second now. You sure about that, Wraith? Are you sure you're always professional? There's the ad. Alright. Okay. Yes. So yes, if you would like to see me put a bow in my hair, $5. I have some pretty cute ones actually. Let me show you what they look like. They look like this. This is what they look like. And I would just take them and put them in my hair. Like that. See? That's why I'm wearing the braids. Because they're cool. And it works well for this. So. Now also, if you guys notice on the left side of my screen, it's probably your right. I have added a thank you wall of comfy cats for everybody who's donated so far. So that would be Arvindel, Ajo, or and then Foxy, Taba, and Zenny. Thank you very much for your donations. I appreciate you. And of course I said that during the ad break, but it's okay. So we are back from our ad. Are there any questions about Starlight or the campaign before I continue reading? We have some time. Happy to answer any questions you have. And there is Frosty Tools again. Hold on 1 second. Okay, sorry. Discord will start randomly blowing up. Oh dear. Alrighty. But yes, if anybody has any questions about Starlight or would like to know more about Starlight, you can use the !Starlight command in chat. And if you'd like to donate, it's the !Donate, or you can use the Tildify extension in my panels down below the stream. Any amount helps, and even if you can't donate, I do appreciate you being here in the stream. That is support enough in my eyes, so thank you. Okay. Sorry. Okay, let's get back to reading. One second. There we go. Okay. Alrighty. Chapter 19. You wish to see me, Master Card? Stefan heard from the doorway to his study. He looked up from his book and saw Jared standing outside. He closed his book and motioned for him to enter and take a seat. As the young man did so, Stefan placed the book back into its spot on the shelf and pulled another, before handing it to Jared as he sat opposite the young man. From what I gathered from the others, he started to say, I could see that you showed the ability of a natural leader in the situation. You weren't necessarily the oldest member of the group, but you naturally took charge and coordinated well with the others. Jared, you've done extremely well since you were brought here, absorbing my teachings like none of the other students except perhaps Marin. What impressed me the most is that you don't show pride in your accomplishments. At all. Okay, give me 1 second. There we go. Okay, sorry, I was getting a little bit loud. Yes, Master, Jared said quietly. Sir, my father taught me when I was little that one should always be humble about oneself and capabilities. I'd always seen him live by it, and we were always well despite events. At least until I left. He'd gotten involved in something when I was still young that I didn't want any part of when I found out what it was. I didn't know specifics until after I was already here. I don't feel any pride in learning here. I'm only grateful for your taking me as a student. Seeing what some of the other students had been able to accomplish when I first arrived, I doubted if I could reach that standard. And yet, On several occasions, you've exceeded them when they were at your stage of training, Stefan told him. And you've grown in many ways since you were brought here a year ago. You've grown in the Force, in maturity, and with skill with the sword, in many other things as well. And that brings me to why I asked you to come here when you were refreshed and rested. If you will, follow me and bring the book with you. They walked into the living room, and Jared followed Stefan to the fireplace, but stopped when Stefan turned around to face him. Jared, where I'm about to take you is not to be mentioned to the students under any circumstances, he told the young man firmly. This place is known only by the members of this family and those we trust as family. I understand, Master, Jared nodded, and I am greatly honored to have earned such trust from you. Stefan nodded softly and placed his hand upon one of the stones that made up the large living room fireplace. A section of the wood paneling just large enough to act as a small doorway opened in front of Stefan, and he walked through. Jared followed him through and noticed that they were starting to go down a stone stairway, which was curving slightly as they went deeper. Within a few moments he entered a cavern that he could only guess to be under the cart's house and grounds. He noted the patterns cut and stained into the smooth rock of the floor and instantly recognized the master's wheel, as in the courtyard of the Praxium. He continued to follow Master Card to a side area, where he looked to see several workbenches along the wall with several tools and blank materials, and his eyes widened slightly. The materials were for... You've reached the time and point in your training that requires you to complete a difficult task, Stefan told him as he motioned for Jared to approach and look over the materials and tools. There are a few materials and tools you may use to start fashioning your first lightsaber. Am I ready for that? Jared asked as he turned around and knelt, concern in his voice. Do you feel that I've earned the opportunity to face this trial? Stefan looked at him, but Jared felt compelled to explain. I do not ask in doubt, Master, not in doubting your judgment of me, but I know that others have been training here for longer than I. They have not been called upon for the trial of building their lightsaber. I do not want the temptation that fell on Bran, David, and Koya to fall on others who would feel cheated by me doing this. Stefan nodded and started measuring Jared in a new light. He was extremely humble in his abilities. You have earned the right, he assured the young man, as have they. They have already begun their trial, just as you soon will. Your concern for them is touching, Jared. You show humility and concern for your peers like few I have known in my time. In so many ways you are exceeding my expectations of it as a student of this Praxium. Jared stood slowly and nodded at his teacher's words. Sir, I am extremely grateful for the trust and honor you have given me by this trial. The book you hold contains notes on techniques and mindsets for the construction process, Stefan told him. Many masters, both of the old order and the new, have written many things that have been handed down in this book. Study it in depth for as long as you feel necessary. When you feel that you are ready, you may begin. For Marin, it seemed like the months flew by as she continued her studies at the Praxium. Making new friends with Bran, David, and Koya was just the beginning. Jared hadn't joked when he told her that the students considered her one of their own. Gradually, they began to show it in different ways. They shared ideas on what helped them in specific tasks, sharing correspondence they received from home, and told stories about the areas from which they had come. Marin did her best to respond in kind, showing them different things she had learned from Jerry as they interested them, and teaching them what she knew of Mandoa. True to her word to Marin, Callista spent time with her before leaving with Zan for more assignments, and began to teach her the basics of Jedi healing techniques. As with everything, Marin was a quick learner and quickly grasped how to place herself in a healing trance, as well as another Jedi. It would have been nice to know this during Ethan's trial, she thought to herself after Callista had left. Gradually, Jerry started to show her more techniques with the knife. At the same time, Andrea continued to show her more techniques associated with the fourth form, specifically emphasizing and encouraging adaptations that helped Marin with her saber technique. Within a short time, Marin was handling the bokken gracefully and incorporating different kinds of acrobatics and spins into her strikes and blocks. Soon, she was getting used to training lightsaber as she practiced kata independently and with the other students. She left with Jarius at different times for a short period. Her first was to return to their home in the Tanaga system, where he proceeded to teach her and assisted in making her first set of Beskargam, the armor that a Mandalorian would wear. Being her first set of armor, and because she was still growing, she only forged the upper body armor along with the thigh and shin pieces. When it came time to select colors, she chose black with orange trim, representing justice and a thirst for life, which she most definitely had. With her new armor and further training on using a blaster from Jarius, he brought her with him on some of the less complex missions he took. Along the way, she started to learn about the different systems on his ship, Tricinia, not just how they worked, but also why they worked, as well as how to fly the ship, going over the basic controls and maneuvers. In the galaxy, events had transpired that awed her in a way that she would never have thought possible. A short while after their trial, 2 visitors arrived that she had never met before, but 2 that she knew about from the other students and Master Card. The rogue Jedi, Mikron Din, and his wife, General Ari Din of the New Republic Armed Forces. Marin had felt the immense power coming from the rogue, almost rivaling the energy she felt flowing from Master Card. Word had reached the students of the challenge by the Sith not long after, when they kidnapped Jedi and students from the Temple on Coruscant and the Jedi Academy on Chandrila. Inside, Marin hoped that the one student who had left the Praxium was all right. All the students at the Praxium were surprised that none of the Sith had come for them here on Catan, but Stefan assured them that all was well where they were. Several older students had requested permission to join with the others at Ithor, but the Master had forbidden it. With Stefan, Dylan, and Rinius at Ithor and later going into battle at Mist, Andrea had assumed the role of headmistress for a short time, reinforcing techniques already taught. Marin had wondered why she wasn't at the battle, but a private meeting where Andrea had asked her to revealed the answer. Andrea was pregnant with her first child. Marin was happy for her, but then she realized that Andrea couldn't continue teaching her the 4th form for quite some time. Andrea reassured her that Master Card would continue her lessons until Andrea was ready to start again. Dylan and Renius arrived by themselves some time later. They told the students what had happened during the space battle above Mist and later on the surface. The images they relayed were overwhelming. Hundreds of Jedi, rogues, and even the Jansari against hundreds of Sith warriors in one of the most massive battles in the Order's history. Master Card had returned a few days after his sons. Marin and the others could tell that there was a profound change in him. His lessons to the students in philosophy and morals were more in-depth than before. Lessons with the sword were now on a level that surprised everyone, but it was a surprise for the better, as it seemed like the techniques of every student improved. Stefan went into more in-depth lessons with Marin as time passed, showing her techniques in force concealment and other powers to help her keep herself unseen. He also took her aside with some other students who expressed the desire for further instruction in the warrior's path, and began to teach them additional weapons techniques and how to use their ability in the Force to enhance them. In a short while, Marin was not only learning the sword and her knives, she was introduced to throwing her knives accurately by using the Force, eventually using other weapons such as the Katani shuriken and staff weapons. Eventually, all the students picked up on these advanced techniques, even those taking up the healing arts. They wished to learn at least some of them. Word was slowly spreading through the Jedi community that the students who had achieved knighthood through his Praxium were some of the more formidable opponents others had sparred with. Before Marin realized it, a year had passed since she entered the doors of the Praxium for the first time with Jarius. Jared was entering his final trials to become a Jedi Knight, his friendship with Marin strengthening by leaps and bounds since coming to her defense that first day. His sudden trip to Ilum had surprised her, and she wondered what had happened until one of the other students explained that it was one of the few places in the galaxy where the focusing crystal for a lightsaber could be found. She waited eagerly to see how he had done till he appeared in the courtyard for exercises several months after Zan's trial with a lightsaber in his hand that didn't resemble the others, and activated a brilliant silver blade. In a way, it made her wonder when it would be her turn to undergo the trial. There's a missing section in here, guys. Sorry. That's what happens when my computer eats things. Oh, So there's a whole section in here that talks about a festival, but that whole chunk is actually gone, so yeah. Alrighty. It had been several weeks since the festival, and the day's training ended like any other. Marin spent much of her time with Andrea today, learning more about her style of lightsaber combat. But she focused more on general aspects of the Force as well. She could move objects with finer control now and stretch out her senses further to sense the mood of any living thing in the area. Andrea took the time to round out her abilities instead of focusing on just one thing. Everyone was beginning to enter the hall for the evening meal when they noticed some decorations. It was someone's birthdays. But whose? The answer came from after everyone was seated and Master Card stood up and walked to join everyone in the middle of the tables. I've always attempted to make sure that everyone's life is celebrated when the anniversary of their coming into this galaxy arrives, he told them quietly. One person of honor tonight hasn't ever given us a time to celebrate hers. Well, after careful research through Corellia's database and some further slicing to verify things, he looked over at Marin where she was sitting with Jared. To our Mandalorian student, join me in wishing her a very happy birthday. Most of the students applauded loudly and several more whistled. Much cheering started to fill the hall. Stefan looked around at the merriment and turned to look towards Marin again, and could tell that she was beginning to blush. Marin ducked her head, her cheeks flaming, but she was grinning. How had Master Card known? How had he even gained access? She looked sideways at Jarius across the table, noticing his smile. She then clutched Jared's hand, suddenly nervous. Stefan sensed how she was feeling and knew better than to motion for her to stand. It wouldn't be a good idea, given how she was blushing. Several of the students congratulated her as Stefan quieted the rest down. As per the custom, if the students and the person of honor wish, we can amend curfew for the evening, but not too late, as lessons will begin the same as normal. There was a chorus of cheers, followed by immediate good-natured groans. Marin smiled and nodded to Master Card. What would she do for her birthday? She had no idea, but she was glad that he'd made an effort to find out. She hadn't even known when her birthday was. She caught Jarius winking at her from across the table. He leaned over and whispered, "Curious as to how he found out?" Marin grinned. "I am, actually. I never knew my last name, or where I was born, even while I was at the orphanage." She squeezed his hand and reached across the table to slip her fingers into his. "Well, your father told Master Card what part of Coronet City he figured you were in," Jared said. "Her Highness Andrea is pretty good at slicing, and with the help of a fellow Jedi Master who's skilled at it, they were able to find your records on the Corellian mainframe." Marin grinned and raised an eyebrow at Jared, eyeing Jarius momentarily with a knowing look. "You wanted to surprise me," she told him, squeezing his hand. At that moment, she spotted a bit of commotion at the entrance to the kitchens. One of the kitchen staff came out carrying a cake. It looked like ujale. Just the sight of it made her mouth water. She giggled as she spied the candles placed carefully on top. "And that was your father's idea," Jared said as he followed her gaze. Marin just laughed. "Uj cake is made with nuts, dried fruit, and syrup. It's very sweet." Jared just grinned. "That'll probably keep some of the students awake." She giggled and smiled as the kitchen worker who placed the cake he was carrying in front of her. He winked, hugged her gently, and slipped a small package into her hands before returning to the kitchen. As he moved away, Marin looked down at the small wrapped box in her lap. It was rare for her to get gifts. She fingered the smooth ribbons briefly before gently pulling on one end to loosen the simple bow. Inside was a wooden box about the size of her lap. She lifted the lid gently and peeled back the tissue inside. What she found made her gasp and utter a mild curse in Mandoa under her breath. Nestled in the tissue lay 2 intricately worked leather sheaths for her knives, a new weapons belt, and 2 new holsters and hardware for 2 blasters. She looked around, but he'd gone. Her gaze then connected with Jarius. "Berkase Goldatur, Marika," Jarius said as he walked up behind her and gave her a hug. She turned and wrapped her arms around his waist, carefully setting the box on the table. She noticed that the straps for the blaster holster that held the base to her thigh were adjustable, and the belt could easily be exchanged for a longer one as she grew. "Foray," she said softly, wishing the other had stayed around so she could thank him. She wondered if he'd done the work himself, but she knew that some Katani were skilled in that area. "We'll fill that holster later," he whispered with a smile as Andrea came up to give her a hug. "And here's something from us," she told Marin as she handed her a slightly smaller package. Marin smiled at Darius, clutching his fingers for a moment before she let go. She carefully accepted Andrea's package as she was engulfed in the hug. It was hard to believe she'd been training with Andrea for nearly a year. She felt like she'd learned so much, and like Andrea was the older sister she'd never had. The wrapping was a delicate deep blue with a satiny white ribbon. She'd carefully folded the wrapping from the other gift and did the same here, gently pulling on the end of the ribbon to loosen the bow. It slid off the wrapped box, pooling in creamy white curls in her lap as she carefully slid her finger beneath one of the taped ends, loosening it before she folded it carefully. She now held a box in her lap about the size of her palms. She carefully pried the lid up with her fingers, holding her breath and working the delicate latch. Inside lay a necklace with a delicate silver chain on dark blue satin. The pendant was a deep blue stone with a faint silver striations through it. Delicate wirework held it to the chain. She grinned slightly, realizing it was an almost perfect match for the tunic and skirt she'd bought at the festival. Andrea smiled. "This isn't just for my family," she told her quietly. "My husband was interested in the training that I've been giving you, and my father-in-law was as well. This is as much a gift from Cataan's monarch as this family." Marin gasped. "Me?" Jared grinned. "Everyone here the first year always has a special gift from our hosts," he said. "It's different for everyone, but just as special." Marin's cheeks flamed, and she hugged Andrea tightly. "Vorentier," she said, softly, using the more formal variant of thank you. "This is Candosula, Meshla," she breathed. "I think some folks are waiting to enjoy the cake with you." Jared prodded at her teasingly, looking over at a few of the younger students. Marin giggled, carefully setting Andrea's gift aside, closing the box again as she pushed it and the other package to the side. Jarius offered her the knife, besides the cake and a stack of small plates. She took it and carefully cut into the cake, slicing it into sections before cutting it into smaller pieces. The other students formed a line at the end of the table. As she began dishing the cake onto the plates and passing them out, some students pressed small wrapped gifts into her hands. She was floored. How had her father told everyone at the Praxium without her finding out? "I have my ways," Jarius told her. "I have my ways." We have an ad coming up in about 4 minutes and 35 seconds. I need a drink of water. Give me a second. Later, once everything had died down and Jarius was in Marin's quarters, he handed her a simple wooden box with a ribbon. Marin sat on her bunk, tucking her feet under her as she cradled the box on her lap. "You didn't have to," she said, flushing. She was still getting used to so many people caring about her. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood before gently removing the ribbon. "Well," he started to say, as he sat on the bed next to her, "this is something you were going to get eventually anyway." She smiled and slipped the fingers of her right hand around his left for a moment before she began working the latch on the box. Inside, nestled snugly in dark foam, lay a modified DE-10 blaster. "I picked this up from an old friend whose grandfather served Corellia's special forces and in Corspec special teams," Jarius told her. "His grandmother ended up using this one while they were working for Alliance Intelligence." "How did you ever get your hands on it?" she asked, grinning. "I thought Corsac weapons were off limits." And then she laughed, knowing she probably shouldn't have asked. "Well, considering this one's over 50 years old and was out of circulation for most of its life," he said with a shrug. "He figured he owed me for helping him on a special job once." "Ah." Marin nodded and ran her fingers over the weapon's smooth lines before she set the box aside and hugged him. He grinned. And believe it or not, Ethan sends his wishes too. She stilled for a moment. He's not still mad, is he? I haven't seen him in a while. Not anymore, Jerry has told her. I ran into him on Ord Mantell a week or so back. He's over how you showed him up. I'm glad for that, she said quietly, leaning against his shoulder. I was worried for a while because the test was difficult. I wasn't trying to show him up, but I was defending myself without weapons. She shrugged. He nodded. He'll live. He then grinned and looked at the chrono. You've got more training in the morning. You should probably get some rest. And that's the end of chapter 19. Okay. We have an ad coming up in 2 minutes. Thank you. I've been talking a bunch. Okay. Alright. Wait 1 second while I look at this. Oh no, actually that should probably work. Okay. We have an ad coming up in 1 minute and 25 seconds. So I can read a little bit on chapter 20 if you guys want before we get the ad. Okay. Chapter 20. Several weeks had passed since her birthday, and the training passed smoothly during the spring months. It was several days before the summertime began, and Master Card was discussing several things about the Jedi Code in the Praxium's amphitheater when he looked to see Dylan walking up to the outer ring. The landing at the top of the theater was the only way inside from the western side of the courtyard. It was curved, and the stage opened out to the forest surrounding the mountain behind them. This provided a natural backdrop for the speaker or performers on the stage, which Stefan felt was an ideal setting for lectures and discussions. What caught his attention was the person standing next to Dylan. He was a young man, probably close to Jared's age, if not a little older. Stefan noted that the youth was wearing the tunics of one of the martial schools that resided in the province, and it was one of the more prestigious ones. He wore the traditional baldric for an official messenger and held a scroll in his left hand. That told Stefan all he needed to know about what would happen, and he motioned for Dylan and the messenger to walk down the steps to the stage. I'm going to stop there because we have an ad starting in 3 seconds. Thank you for that hydrate. Hold on. There we go. Thank you very much for that hydrate. Need that. Okay. Okay. Sorry guys, I'm just waiting for the ad. It ends in 1 minute and 20 seconds. Take a break, get some water, have a stretch. Okay. I'm gonna do a stretch because I'm slouching. Notoriously bad habit of slouching, so trying to not do that. Didn't realize the ad was done. Sorry. Oh, dear. Wait 1 second. Okay. Alright. Okay. There we go. I just had to figure out where we were. Alrighty. Closed captioning. There we go. It's taking a while. Marin turned her head as she heard MasterCard pause and followed his gaze. She recognized that tunic. It was the same style and color as worn by the one who had faced off against Stefan at the festival. She tugged on Jared's sleeve and pointed. He turned his head and saw the young man, predominantly the sash and scroll. "I think I know what this is," he whispered. Marin frowned, as she was unfamiliar with that area of Katani culture. She watched with interest as Dylan and the messenger approached the stage. She noticed that a hush had fallen over the assembled students as if they were holding their breath. Stefan moved to the center of the stage and motioned for the young man to come forward. "I need no ability in the Force to know what you carry to me," he said. The young man responded by bowing and offering the scroll in both hands. "Master Stefan Card," he said. "My master wishes your acceptance of this message and awaits your reply." Stefan took the scroll single-handedly, brought his other hand up to unroll it, and started reading. The headmaster's penmanship was as reputed as his martial abilities. He noted this as he continued reading, waiting until he finished, and rolled the scroll back up before he answered. "Tell your master that I accept and will send one of my students with a formal reply in the morning," he said, as he bowed to the young man. The young man rose and nodded before he started up the stairs faster to reach his horse outside the Praxium. Marin turned to Jared, a question in her eyes. The message was of some importance, for she had noted the formality. She knew where it had come from, and if she was right, she knew who, but not why. She frowned, scanning the rest of the students as they began talking amongst themselves. They were curious, just like she was. "What could the message mean?" she asked Jared quietly, keeping an eye on Master Card. Stefan closed his eyes, reached out with his hand, and motioned 3 times. At the same time, 3 chimes sounded from the massive bell at the center of the Praxium. 3 tones was a message to all the students elsewhere in studies or other matters that their presence was requested at the amphitheater, and within minutes the rest of the students gathered and took seats around the stage. Marin's curiosity was piqued. It was not often that Master Card called such an assembly of the students. She exchanged a look with Jared, slipping her fingers into his before she turned her attention back to the stage. "My students," Stefan began to say as he looked over everyone. "Word about our Praxium is picking up and gathering admiration. As such," he added as he held up the scroll, "we have received a challenge from the Darha school in the west of Edmonton. They have asked for 4 of our best students and a fair match to 4 of theirs." Marin gasped. In all the time she'd been here, such a challenge had not occurred. She'd heard of challenges during the festival over the years. But this... She exchanged a significant look with Jared, squeezing his hand in muted excitement. Around her she could hear the excited buzz as the other students reacted to the news. "This challenge has been long anticipated," Stefan continued. "I have expected them to come from other schools as well, looking to challenge the Jedi of Mount Adan." The last part set the mood, letting each student know the feeling was about them. "I would like a volunteer to take the official response to their school tomorrow." Marin's hand shot up before she could even think. She felt Jared's elbow dig into her ribs as he shook his head and just grinned. Stefan almost chuckled as he noticed that hers was not only the first one up, but one of only a few raised. "Marin, are you familiar enough to know the way?" She nodded. "I believe so, Sensei. To make sure, a look at a map would not be out of order." She smiled, trying hard to contain her excitement. Stefan looked to the side and saw that Brand's arm was also raised, and nodded. Brian was a native Katani, and, though from a different part of the planet, he knew the area well. Marin, I want Bran to accompany you. He knows the terrain and the traditions. He'll be competent in helping you with any formalities. Agreed? Marin nodded. Agreed, Sensei. She bowed in acknowledgement, looking across at Bran with a slight grin. Now, Stefan said as he looked to the rest of the students. To those unfamiliar with Katani tradition regarding martial schools, this will be our 4 best students against theirs. Since they are the school that issued the challenge, they are to choose the time of the match. As the challenged school, we choose the location. Jared, he said as he looked over at the young man, you are the best swordsman among the students. Koya, you will accompany him. Tara, you and Marin will round out the students for the challenge. Marin gasped, stifling a swear. She hadn't expected that at all. She knew Koya and Jared well, but hadn't had much chance to get to know Tara. She frowned, raising her hand politely. Master Card, what exactly does a challenge like this entail? Stefan smiled. It will be a series of duels. Marin, you are against your opponent with a bogan as your weapon of choice. The first to tap the other 5 times is the victor. If we win 3 out of 5 duels, we are the victor. Excuse me, Master, Tara chimed in. You said 3 out of 5, yet you said 4 of our students against theirs. I did, Stefan said, with a smile, holding the scroll up for emphasis. The 5th duel is a friendly challenge between their master and myself, as stated in their invitation. We are old friends and have always wanted to test each other. This is just a continuation of that. Marin's eyes widened. She remembered the confrontation between them at the festival as they played out the story of Ataro. She looked around at the other 3. And what about the location, Sensei? We are to choose that, correct? We are, Stefan said. And I have a thought, but I will decide when I write the response tonight. I'll expect you and Bran at the house after the morning meal. Yes, Master, she replied and bowed, glancing at Bran, who gave her a nod. Give me 1 second, guys. Okay, need water. Always remember to hydrate. It's super important. I don't. Okay. There we go. Stefan finished writing out his response on a scroll as Jade appeared in the doorway to his study. Marin and Bran are here, she told him as he looked up from his writing. They can come in, Stefan said, looking back down and beginning to finish the letter. Marin bowed politely to Lady Card and stepped into Stefan's study with Bran, who was a half step behind her. She wore a blue tunic and black skirt with a sash tied lower around her waist. She'd had one of the other students help braid her hair, and the pendant from Andrea lay around her neck. Bran also wore a more formal dark blue tunic with black leggings and boots. As she entered his study, Marin bowed. You wish to see us, Sensei? Yes, Stefan said as he rolled the parchment and looked up at them. He reached for a wax stick and held it close to a candle that he'd lit for this purpose. Once enough was melted, Stefan smeared it over the end of the scroll and pressed a stone seal with his family's crest on it to seal the scroll. Here's our formal response to the challenge, he said as he got up and walked around his desk. Bran, do you remember where the Darhar school is? I do, Sensei, the young man answered as Stefan placed a scroll in a certain case and handed it to Marin. Marin nodded and bowed, accepting the scroll carefully. She tucked it into the carrying case that hung off her belt. She had to admit that she still felt awkward wearing a skirt. You won't have to be there for long, Stefan told them as they walked from the house and over to where fresh mounts were waiting. He anticipated Marin wearing a semi-formal outfit and had prepared a side saddle that Andrea used when she was younger. Only enough to present the scroll and await his verbal response. The school has a more traditional layout than the Praxium, but Bran can point out anything you need to do or walk to. Marin nodded and grinned a little at the side saddle. She'd figured since she was acting as a formal messenger she should dress more formally. She was Katani, after all, if by adoption. She smiled as she realized her mount was the same one she'd first taken up to the Praxium. More traditional? She asked, raising an eyebrow at Mr. Card as she climbed carefully into the saddle and arranged her skirt. And a bit more formal since you're wearing a skirt, he told her as he handed her the reins. My daughter Andrea used this when she was younger, so it should work well. Remember, this is all about formality. If you have any questions about what you need to say or do, Bran can help you. Merrin grinned, her cheeks pinking slightly as she nodded and accepted the reins. She looked down in thought for a moment before she looked over at Bran. Thank you, she said, with a nod to Stefan. She was slightly nervous as she hadn't done anything quite so formal before. Bran looked back at her and grinned before making a double clicking sound and gently tapping his heels into his horse to get them started towards the road. I'll be at the Praxium, Stefan told them, so you can return straight there to give me his reply. Understood, Sensei. Merrin bowed her head and clicked her tongue, nudging her mount forward after Bran. We should be back within a day. And then she was gone, following Bran down the road until she caught up. There's no particular order we have to ride in on the way there, Bran said after she caught up. But once we get there, I'll be behind and to the side once we dismount and start walking the grounds. Merrin frowned. Why? It's a tradition thing, he said with a grin. The messenger, as such, is supposed to be unarmed, so my role is to defend you should something happen. It's the old way. Merrin breathed, glad Andrea had advised her to leave her weapons belt behind. She'd had to admit that she felt rather naked without it, but what he said made sense. She pondered that. Besides, I don't know where I'm going. She grinned. Do you think that's why he sent you along? Well, Bran grinned a little wider. I know most of the terrain, but I guess he figured that you two might take a little longer getting back if he sent Jared. Merrin blushed crimson and ducked her head slightly, but she was grinning. A wise choice on his part, then, she said. I think the rest of us would have understood, he told her as they continued. There are a few others that have considered relationships besides you two. I remember Master Card saying it was only natural if it didn't rule over everything else. Merrin smiled. Yeah, we're all getting to that age where we're beginning to think that boys, or girls, in your case, might not be so weird. It started when Jared helped me that first day, but I didn't realize what it was until after he returned from Ilum. She sighed. And to be honest, it's been Candosula, having him and others to talk to when Bruer isn't around. She grinned slightly, apologetically, as she realized she'd been speaking in Mandoa again. I haven't seen him around in over a week. Where's he been? Bran asked as they rounded a curve in the road and looked to see Edmonton further down in the valley. Merrin shrugged, brushing a few loose strands of hair behind her left ear. I'm not sure. I think he's working some bodyguard contract or something. He'd mentioned something about it before he left, but didn't say for whom or where. Probably for Dylan's sister-in-law, Bran said with a chuckle. Merrin raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? It was partially a joke, he told her as they neared the town. Dylan's wife, Kara. Her sister is supposedly a young singer from Commonor. I've heard she's popular with some of the younger city planet folks. Merrin grinned. It would make sense, though, she said. She studied the layout of Edmonton, noting the road that led off in the direction they needed to go. She chuckled. I thought this would take longer than it is. Oh, we're only to Edmonton, Bran told her. The school we're going to lies well on the other side of the mountains. He pointed to a series of peaks several miles from the other side of town. Merrin laughed nervously. Well, it's good that I told him it would be at least a day. She lifted her hand and shaded her eyes, studying the road ahead. At least the weather is in our favor. Aye, the summers are usually mild. Bran took a deep breath of the cool air and smiled as they continued. I'm delighted to be learning the way here instead of Chandrila. I know it's more of an oceanic planet, but this is home. Merrin smiled, remembering how he'd almost been sent to Chandrila. I'm glad you stayed, and I'm glad we're friends. She was silent for a moment as she studied the mountains in the distance. I don't think I could ever get used to the ocean. I don't like cold and damp. So for me, it's here, over bars, that's home. Rand nodded as they continued. It took them an hour from Edmonton to reach one of the passes that would take them through the mountains. Once they were through, they could see another town in the next valley. It should be about another hour or so until we reach the school, he said as he continued to lead them down the road. Give me one sec. Lost my spot. Not bad, Marin said approvingly as she looked up at the sun overhead. It was getting close to the noon hour. I just can't help being a little nervous, she admitted. I honestly can't figure out what prompted me to volunteer. She shrugged and just grinned. Eagerness to impress? And probably see more of the planet. Maybe? Marin laughed. Probably more the second than the first, she allowed after a moment's thought. I hadn't had much chance to travel, and I was intrigued by the demonstration during the festival. She described a little about how it resembled the Mandalorian The Wurda, which is the Rage of the Shadow Warrior, for those who don't know. Okay. Brandon nodded during her explanation. It does sound very similar, he said as they continued down the road. I've heard of the school we're heading to many times. They even did a demonstration last year during the festival. It will certainly be an interesting matchup when it's time for the challenge. She grinned. Makes me glad I spent so much time practicing. It should be educational, in my case. Then our arrival should give you some insight, Bran told her. We'll probably see every student there going through drills. Marin grinned. I know the school trains people who enter the Katani Marines, and the Knights. How similar is their training to what we learn? In some ways, it's very similar, but different in our own way, he told her half cryptically. Sorry. Master Card, being a Jedi, learned their forms of lightsaber combat. It's said that before he started training at the Jedi Academy, his father, of Katan's Knights, was already teaching him the way of the sword. I've seen some of the records and stories from other Jedi that he was already besting some of their more seasoned students after he arrived. Her eyes widened. He's very skilled. She thought about that briefly. The first time I met him was when I saw him practicing in the training circle. It was breathtaking. I could feel the force swirling around him. She frowned. It's strange. When I first came here, I thought I'd have to choose between the Mandalorian way or that of the Jedi. I can understand the difficulty there, Bran told her. If you had tried to go to Chandrila, Master Tam might have had reservations about you trying to walk both paths. I think Master Card is more understanding of that. I've heard that a natural warrior is rare, even among our people. Many inside and outside the Jedi Order believe that he is one. I wonder if it has anything to do with how he was raised, she thought. I know for a Mandalorian we trained from a young age. I was 6 when my father found me, and he started training me almost immediately, though he didn't officially adopt me until just before I came to Catan. She smiled, reaching up to wipe a tear as she remembered the emotion of that. For a Mandalorian, when you become one, your past is erased, forgotten, as if it never happened. You are only judged by what you do from then on. The Mandalorians call it Sin Vatin, a clean slate, a new beginning. Could be. We're all trained in at least the basic martial forms. Even artisans, merchants, and the nobility. It's just part of our heritage. He chuckled a little. I think I know why I was chosen to accompany you as well. She raised an eyebrow. And that would be? Well, I began training young because I wanted to enlist in either the Navy or Marines, he said with a grin. So, the logical school my father decided to send me to was... He gestured towards their destination. Marin laughed. So, how exactly did you end up at Master Card's Praxium, then? She asked curiously. In one particular sparring session, the Master noticed that my reflexes were considerably faster than my opponent's. When he asked me about it, I did tell him that when I released all thought, it was like I could see my opponent's next move. He closed his eyes in memory. He invited Master Card the next day to observe another sparring session with a different student. After that, they spent a long time in discussion in the master's room in the school. Marin grinned. It reminds me of my Buer's discussion with Etika before I came here. I almost didn't want to come at first because I thought he would leave me here. She smiled slightly and reached beneath the collar of her tunic, pulling out something that hung on a heavier chain than the pendant she wore. She fingered it briefly, running her fingers over the script, the scrolling lines of the script engraved on the metal. Bran saw it and turned to look closely, his eyes widening. Wow! Marin flushed and moved to stuff the chain beneath her tunic again, but something stopped her and she looked over at him. Maven? She asked. Where did you get those? He asked, gesturing to what she had in her hands. Marin blushed. They're my father's. He gave them to me, something I could keep close while he's gone, she said quietly. She didn't fully understand the significance of his question. May I see them? She hesitated, curling her fingers around the tags before passing them over. Jarius hadn't told her much about his service in the Marines. I only want to read the information on them, Bran told her. It's pure curiosity, I assure you. Marin eyed him for a moment before nodding. Sorry, I'm a bit protective of them, I guess. Bran slowed his mount, leaned over to read the script on them, and murmured as he read. And then suddenly, oh, my great lady above, he whispered as he read over it again. Marin drew her mount to a stop beside his and peeked over his shoulder. She still needed to learn to read the Katani script better. Maven? She asked, sensing his surprise. What is it? He looked up. I thought I recognized his face and name, he said softly, gesturing to the tags in his hand. Has he not told you about this? Marin shook her head. Naish, not a lot, and I'm unsure why. We have an ad starting in 5 minutes. Bran pointed to the second line of the inscription. This identifies his rank as Master Sergeant in the Katani Marines. It's the second highest non-commissioned rank one can attain, and the third line shows his hometown as Edmonton. He looked up at her. Great lady above, I've known this man. But how? Bran shook his head in disbelief. He hadn't told her. Your father was a special forces sergeant. He went through enlisted training with mine, and they both served under the master of the school we're going to. Great lady above, this means I'm having us go inside a different way when we get there. What? Why? Marin asked, confused. Ethan told me once about his special forces training, but he never went into any detail. She was still trying to understand why it was so important now. This is something I feel will be important, he said, resting his hand on her shoulder to reassure her. It's not just 2 students from Master Card's Praxium delivering the scroll. It'll be the children of 2 of his Marines that he trusted with his life. It'll set an entirely different tone in front of his students. This is good. She frowned. I still don't understand. Do you think Master Card allowed me to go because he knew? An excellent possibility, Bran said. And I think it's a good opportunity for us. And I'm sure the master there will be glad to see a sign of Jerry's being able to move on after what happened with his family. Marin was still confused. I think I came in halfway through the hollow vid here. Care to fill me in? She nodded at his last comment, remembering what Lady Card had said the first day she'd arrived on Catan. Did he ever tell you about his family? Alec, a little, she said, softly, remembering the sorrow she'd sensed then. I asked him about it after he brought me home the first time. Bran nodded and clicked his horse forward. He'd tell her on the way to the school. From what I learned from my father, yours was approached by a group. I'm trying to remember who he said they were, but they tried to convince him to join their group. It went so against Jarius's grain that he refused and mopped the floor with them when they attempted to convince him with force. Marin nodded and kept pace with him easily. Kirtzad, she whispered. Death Watch. I didn't know that, Later on, he continued, while his unit was on a training exercise, they received an emergency message to recall him to Catane. His wife and several others were killed when a shuttle they were on exploded. I remember my father telling me that he had a text-only message waiting for him when he returned. It was the ones responsible. Marin gasped. He never told me any of this. Bran looked at her in surprise. None of it? Not in great detail. He kind of glossed over it. He was probably trying not to scare me. He nodded softly, but hesitated. I'm not entirely sure if it's my place to say the rest unless you want to hear it. Marin shrugged. I might as well hear it sooner rather than later, and I've seen some pretty nasty things myself. Her hand unconsciously slid down over the long scar on her stomach from when she'd been younger. It was said that he went off the grid while on bereavement leave. Then news started showing up of a string of deaths in the systems outside our control, and some inside. Some of them were brutal. It had reached my father that Jarius was going after the people who tried to recruit him and killed his family. One of the instances, he shuddered. Father didn't know I was eavesdropping, or I would have been whipped. But he had dealt with one by strapping the man to his sublight engines. Marin swore, her stomach twisting at the mere thought. What happened then? She asked, feeling slightly sick. She drew her mount to a stop, feeling as if she might faint. He went on to his next destination. Marin felt ill. She could only imagine what had happened then. She sat there for several moments, trying to bring her stomach under control. That's Jarela, she muttered. Well, Jarius wasn't listening to his training or reasoning, or at least not that part of it, Bran said. He was edging close to what Master Card calls the dark side. Marin nodded silently, running her finger over his tags again before slipping the chain around her neck. I've heard him say a few times that he feels barely worthy of steel. I think that's the reason he doesn't have a saber. I asked him about it once, and also why I think he didn't continue training with Master Card. I'm going to stop there because we have an ad starting right about now. So. Oh dear. Sorry. Of course he knows. No, yeah, Stefan knows. Stefan definitely knows. You'll find out later. Oh yeah, he knows. Okay. Thank you, Ejo. Oh, hey. That went to the sniper. Thank you very much, sir. The sniper is one of my mods. Much appreciated. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We're in an ad. We'll be back in a minute and 25 seconds. Okay. Thank you for that gifted sub. How did tour go for you guys this evening? Sorry, I got distracted. Ooh, yes. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I am not familiar with Lord Varys. You'll have to tell me about that. Meryn sighed. I think he was worried if he continued the training, something like that might happen again. Worthy of steel, Bran said to himself as he looked down the trail. To hear a Katani say that, especially a Marine, I guess what they said about what he did was true. It takes a lot for one to genuinely feel that. Meryn nodded sadly. I've tried to get him a bit involved in my training here, but... She shrugged helplessly and took a few calming breaths, trying to settle into the focusing technique Jaehaerys had taught her. Bran turned his mount to look at her. I think I've said enough for the moment, he told her with a soft smile. I wouldn't want you to have to wipe tears away before we get there. She chuckled a bit. I'll be all right, I think, she told him softly as she drew her mount to a stop, feeling the technique begin to relax her. She reached up with her left hand to slip the tags under her tunic, leaving nothing but the chain and the pendant Andrew had given her visible. They spent the remainder of the trip in small talk as Bran led her through the town and down the road towards the school gate. They entered with no problem, and Bran could hear the sounds of a drill in progress. I knew they would, he said as he began dismounting. Meryn nodded and grinned, looping the reins over the pommel of her saddle before she jumped quickly to the ground and smoothed her skirt, running her fingers over her hair in a quick check before she adjusted her belt. Master Card had provided her with a balderic in the Praxium's colors, and she adjusted it on her shoulder before she turned to Bran and said softly, I'm ready. All right, he said, as he adjusted the belt of his Jedi robes and ensured his training saber was where he could reach it. He was also in the midst of building his own lightsaber. The way I want to do this, I'll lead and make a formal introduction, okay? Okay, and what do I do again? She asked quietly, suddenly nervous as she smoothed her skirt. She felt exposed without her weapons, but she knew it was necessary, and she trusted Bran, especially after their test together. After I introduce you, he may say a few things about your father and ask you if he is well, he told her before entering the school. Once he has stopped talking on that subject, you must declare that you are bringing Master Card's response to his challenge and choosing the match's location. Once he gives you his formal reply after reading the scroll, all that is required of us is to bow and go unless he wants to say something else about your father. All right. Meryn took a deep breath and squared her shoulders, considering for a moment if she should make her tags visible. Bran picked up on the thought. I'm not sure about that. She smiled a bit nervously. If he's observant as let me try that again. If he's as observant as I think he is, I may not have to. That is true, he said with a smile. Ready? As I'll ever be. Meryn did one more check, smoothing her skirt and tugging her tunic straight before stepping next to him, carefully keeping her head erect. She was here on official business. As they crossed the courtyard, she glanced around surreptitiously, much like she would as if she were checking the area for danger. It was a habit she still had, even though she knew the chances of such here were low. Bran walked up the wooden steps and through the open doorways of the building. The school was just as he remembered it. It was an open floor plan with rooms off to the sides. The floor was the same matting as in the main hall of the Praxium, but the center portion had the same markings as the training circle, Catan's master's wheel. The students were practicing kata in unison, which he had done many times before when he was here, and they were doing exceptionally well. Bran knew it was to show the visitors something about the school that had challenged them. Stefan selecting him to accompany Meryn would probably throw that off track. In the center of the back wall, kneeling and watching his students, was the school's master. He stood up as they approached. Bran walked up the center of the floor, through the master's wheel, and bowed deeply to the master. Meryn frowned as she saw Bran cross through the center of the master's wheel. She kept the edge as she'd been taught, showing respect. When they came together again, she bowed to the master and waited for Bran to speak. My greetings to the colonel this morning, Master Talon. Bran Bran said as he remained bowed. The students in the hall looked at each other at what their former classmate had done, and then looked at their teacher, who motioned for them to sit. They did so, their boken to the side. "Bran, son of Marad," the master said as he stood and walked to the two of them, "have you not known enough from the teachings of myself, your father, and certainly Master Carr to disrespect the training circle in this way?" "I do apologize deeply, teacher," Bran said as he bowed, "but the formality of introducing someone of great importance to the master of this school and a colonel of our most respected Marine Corps required me to do so, given the school's layout." Merrin looked sideways at him, but for the moment kept silent. The master's eyes widened slightly at this, and he looked from Bran to the young lady who'd walked in with him, and looked her over. He recognized the pendant she wore as one that was usually a gift from royalty, but the subtle hint of a chain under her tunic caught his attention. "And this person of importance would be?" he asked quietly. "Master," Bran said as he rose from his bow and gestured to Merrin, "it is my honor to introduce Merrin Durza, adopted daughter of Jarius Durza." Merrin bowed low, glad she'd been studying her Katani. She spoke slowly and carefully, her voice just loud enough to reach him. "It is a great honor to meet you, sir. I apologize that my father could not be here." She stood erect again and fought the urge to tuck the tags under her tunic. Instead, she left them in plain view. "Jarius Durza," Master Talon said quietly, his expression lightening as he looked at her, a smile slowly coming to his face. "Your father was one of my most trusted Marines. I mourned with him the loss of his family many years ago. It is good to see that he has adopted a daughter into his family. You were well to do this, Bran. She is of importance to me." "Yes, Master," Bran said as he looked to Merrin and signaled her with his eyes. Merrin took a slow breath, catching Bran's glance. Her left hand dropped to the scroll case at her waist. She opened it carefully and withdrew the rolled parchment. She held it in her left hand as she moved forward, sinking to one knee as she extended it carefully in both hands, with the seal facing him. "Sir, I have come to deliver the reply to your challenge. Please accept this scroll from my sensei, Master Stefan Card." As she finished, she lifted her gaze to the colonel, not in a disrespectful way, but so that he could see her clearly. The light glinted faintly off the oval tags that lay against her tunic. The master looked at the tags that hung from her neck before he reached for the scroll. He read the writing from a distance. They were indeed Jarius's tags. He took the scroll from her hands, broke the seal, and started reading, nodding as he did so. "Your master chooses an appropriate location," he said, softly, as he continued to read the scroll. "Tell Master Carr that we will be at his chosen location in 1 week, at dawn, and we look forward to good fellowship between our schools and this match." Merrin nodded as she filed that information away in her mind. She inclined her head from where she still rested on one knee. "I shall so inform him, sir." She resisted the urge to look sideways at Bran, sensing that breaking eye contact right now wasn't the best idea. She had a strange feeling, as if the colonel was taking her measure. He nodded softly and gestured for her to rise. "When you next see your father, would you pass along a message from me?" Merrin stood and felt impressed to move a couple of steps closer. She felt Bran tense slightly, but she wasn't worried. "It would be my honor. Sir, what message would you like me to pass to him?" she asked. She could feel a strange fluttering in her stomach, but she stilled it with a breath. "Let him know that an old friend has been worried about him for a long time, and that his home is still open for a visit. If the lady wills it, I may be able to see him next week." Merrin had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from gasping. The emotion she'd felt from him almost brought tears to her eyes. He considered Jarius much like a son. It took all of her self-control to keep any trace of it from her face. She bowed once more. "I shall tell him, sir." She could feel the emotion in him again and had to resist the urge to reach out to him. She thought that it wouldn't be appropriate at the moment. "Very well, then," the colonel said as he looked at them both. "It is good to see you again, son of Marad. May you both have a safe journey back to Mount Adan." "Thank you, Master," Bran said as he bowed and began to turn to go. Marin bowed and then hesitated a moment longer before backing away to follow Bran. She was mindful of the boundary of their master's wheel. Outside, Bran led her to where their horses were. As he mounted, he could hear a bellowed command, followed by the students shuffling around and yelling the first move of another kata. He could only shake his head, just as he remembered. Marin watched them for a moment before she placed her foot in the stirrup and swung quickly into her side saddle, taking the reins from the student who'd held them with a nod. She was relatively quiet for a few minutes as they made their way back outside the gates. Bran waited until they were outside the gate and looked to Marin with a wide grin. That went even better than I expected. She raised an eyebrow at him. You had me worried when you cut through the master's wheel. She just shook her head and grinned. She fell silent for a moment, thinking, I had no idea that my father was of such importance to him, or anyone. As I said, not many reach the rank of Master Gunnery Sergeant before retirement, and those that reach it around then have really either busted their rears or applied boots to an enemy's in the purest sense of the word to get that rank. It doesn't get handed out freely. She nodded, still a bit awed. She then reached up with her left hand, her thumb tracing the engravings on the tags before she slipped them back under her tunic. She'd have to ask her father about it later. So, a week. That doesn't give us much time, she mused, watching the trail ahead as they turned towards Edmonton. Then I guess we need to hurry back with the response, Bran said as he looked up the road. Think you can handle going faster in side saddle? She grinned. I think I'll manage. She settled her feet deeper into the stirrups and gripped the reins before she looked over at him. Let's waste no time, then, Bran said with a grin as he tapped his heels into his mount. And that is the end of chapter 20. Okay. Oh, goodness. Sorry. Alrighty. Okay. So, I'm just going to take a minute here and take a water break. Yeah. Definitely drink your water. It's important. I'm also going to pause here for just a minute to talk about Starlight. Okay. So as you know, I am raising money for Starlight Children's Foundation, and their campaign runs from December 1st to December 12th. And the money that we raise goes directly to Starlight. It helps provide toys and books and games for these children that are in the hospital undergoing cancer treatment or treatment for other illnesses. And it's really rough for them, especially around the holidays. They don't really get a chance to spend time with their families. So Starlight Children's Foundation works to provide an opportunity for them to be a kid, have a little fun. So they, give me 1 second. That's really bright. Oh my goodness. Looking at something. Okay. That is super bright. I'm so sorry. I was just looking at Tiltify real quick. So, some of the things that you can donate towards, if you're interested, are, give me 2 seconds, I'm going to find the list. Going to find the list. Okay. Okay. So, for instance, if you donate $10, you can unlock some VR gameplay for 10 children. You can send a happygram with a toy for $10. For $20, you can unlock 20 hours of play on the Starlight Gaming Station. For $40, you can help fund a better hospital gown for a child. It's made out of comfy, soft fabric. And let's see. For $50, you can help fund, for a donation of $50, you can help fund toys, books, and art and craft for a hospital. And for a total donation of $250, or if we get that high, we can help fund a custom red wagon, which is padded and comfy for these kids to roam around in. Because a lot of times they can't go home from the hospital for the holidays. They're stuck there. So providing comfort and fun things for them to do is really important. And I did actually look. I unfortunately can't designate the hospital that these funds go to, but there are 4 hospitals in my local area that do work with Starlight Children's Foundation. So could potentially go to one of those hospitals, which is really encouraging. So, and I think it's really important to help these kids, just let these kids know that people are thinking about them and that we want to be able to help them be a kid for a little while. Because let me tell you, being stuck in the hospital is not fun. I've been there, not from cancer, but for other things. When I was a kid, I was in the hospital quite a lot. And for anybody that has any kind of chronic illness that you have to be in the hospital a lot or getting lots of treatments for, it can be really rough, emotionally, mentally, physically, and being able to do something, play a game, so anything like that to give you something to do. It's really important to be able to provide that for these kids. So, right. And, oh, sorry. Okay. Oh, that's a long chapter. I might go past 10. We'll find out. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, we might go a little past 10. We'll find out. Okay. Thanks, Frosty Tools. Alright. Chapter 21, which is where I said we were going to read to tonight. So we may end up going a little past 10. But that's okay. Okay. Chapter 21. Over the next week, Stefan took special care in training the 4 students he had selected for the match, while Andrea increased her training time with Marion with her particular style. He was satisfied that they were well prepared for the match. On the evening of the match, he had the students turn in early so that they could wake up early the following morning. It was still dark when he had them awakened and gathered for the morning meal. Once that was done, he instructed them on how he wanted them to arrange themselves for the match, and they proceeded to ride towards the setting that Stefan had picked. When they reached the site, daylight was already breaking, and a mild mist covered the plain he'd selected, shrouding a stone plinth in the center of the field. He signaled for the students to spread out and follow behind him in a line as they rode further towards the plinth. As they got closer, he could see shapes through the fog that later resolved into the master and the students of the opposing school. He lifted his hand to call his students to a halt and saw his friend do the same. He rode up a little more to meet up with the colonel. Marion drew her mount to a halt beside Jared and Koya, her eyes following Mr. Card as he crossed the mist-covered plain to meet with the colonel. She was dressed as the other 3 were, in dark blue tunics and black pants, which were the colors of the Praxium. Her bokken was tied to the rear of her saddle, and she looked around, studying the area as she usually did when coming to a new place. Stefan and the colonel stopped next to each other and greeted each other with the warrior's grip. "Fair morning, Colonel," Stefan said with a smile. "And to you, Master Jedi," Talon said as he looked over the field. "I somehow knew you'd pick this field of the brothers' battle." "It was historic then," Stefan said as he gestured toward the plinth. "Just as our match is. I believe it will honor the ones who were here before." The colonel nodded and looked towards Stefan's students. "I see you picked Jarius' daughter as one of your fighters. I appreciate you sending her last week, Stefan. I had been concerned." "I know," the Jedi told him as he nodded and looked back toward his students. "Jarius has been well and apologizes for being unable to be here this morning." Marin frowned slightly as she saw the colonel glance in her direction, but all she felt from him was an appraisal and a bit of relief. She shrugged inwardly. Perhaps she'd be able to talk to him and her father after the challenge. She tamped down on a pang of disappointment at that thought, for he was gone again. Her hand went unconsciously to the tags around her neck, and she traced the engraving with her thumb as she took a slow breath. She then looked to her left and caught Jared's slight nod. "Nervous?" he asked. "A little," she said, guiding her mount closer to his. "I wish Beware could be here." She tried hard to hide the disappointment in her voice, but it still came through. Jared nodded and reached out to hold her hand as Master Card approached and nodded to the remaining students, who formed a half circle around their side of the field. Jared then looked and saw that the other school students were doing the same. "Tara will go first," Stefan said, as the four gathered around him. "Koi will be second, followed by Marin, and then Jared." Marin squeezed Jared's hand for a moment before she let go and moved to join the others, her bokken in her hand. She was surprised that she and Jared were going last, and said as much. "Excuse me, Sensei, may I ask why Jared and I are to go last?" "It's just the order that I picked for the three of you," he told her. "However, usually the school's champions would go last. Since the Master challenged me as the final match, Jared and their champion will be the fourth." We have an ad coming up in about 5 minutes. "Ah," Marin nodded. "That made sense." "Vore," she told Master Card softly, slipping her hand into Jared's again. She looked across the field and saw one of the students from the other school walking towards the plinth with his teacher. "Tara," Stefan said as he dismounted. She was quick to dismount and draw her bokken from its place on her saddle before she walked towards the other two. Jared couldn't hear what was said, but it wasn't long before Tara and her opponent were alone on the field. Their match lasted longer than Jared had anticipated, and with each duel ending in a draw. Bran had told them the students trained to a very high standard, showing their ability to fight a Jedi student to a draw. "Wow," he said as he saw the fifth fight end in yet another draw. "I never would have believed it if I hadn't seen it." "This is going to be a real eye-opener," Bran said as he sat in the saddle next to them. Marin nodded, remembering the drills she'd seen the students working through when she'd visited the school the week before. The discipline they train under. It's incredible. They're very skilled. She looked at Bran briefly before she turned to Jared and said softly, "My father trained there before he joined the Marines." She traced Jarius' tags with her fingers again, a habit she'd picked up when she was nervous or missed him. Koi dismounted and walked up, nodding to Tara as they passed and prepared to face the next opponent. "What do you think?" Jared asked as he looked at Bran. "It's a close matchup," Bran said as he looked at the opponent. "I faced him before, and he's difficult." Marin reached down and gripped Tara's arm for a moment. "You did well. Fighting to a draw takes a lot of skill on their part." She smiled a little before she turned to watch the duel. Koya was doing rather well, but it still impressed her how the student from the Darha school seemed to match him move for move. "I was worried there for a moment," Tara admitted as she got back on her horse. "Bran, you were right. They are good." "You did Kandosi," Marin told her quietly as she kept an eye on the duel. "A draw is nothing to be ashamed of. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself. It speaks highly of their training." Koya and his opponent matched each other move for move. As hard as he tried, it ended up another draw. 2 victories for Koya, 2 for his opponent, and their final fight ended in a draw. Jared was shaking his head and grinning. I knew it would be an interesting day. I do believe I underestimated that. I told you it wouldn't be as easy as you thought, Bran told him. Especially with Master Card's rule of not using the Force to aid us. It would have been an unfair advantage. Aye, Jared said as Koya walked back towards them. Merrin, he said, it's your turn to show us what Lady Andrea and your father have taught you. Merrin swallowed, taking a few deep breaths before she nodded. She ran her thumb briefly over Jairus' tags before she slipped them back under her tunic and squeezed his hand. She then slid down from her saddle and landed quickly, drawing her bokken from the scabbard tied to the back of her saddle. She took a moment to go through a few quick warm-ups and then stepped out onto the field, her bokken firmly in her left hand with the tip down behind her. She moved across the grass, focusing using the technique Jairus had taught her. It wasn't long before she stood a few paces from her opponent. The other student bowed to her slowly before he shifted his position to present his right side. He held his bokken in his left hand like a sheathed sword, his right hand free at his side. Merrin returned the bow and responded quickly, spreading her stance. She was glad she'd spent so much time training without using the Force. The Terrace Kasi would be helpful here. If only Beware could be here. She pushed that thought away and breathed again, centering herself in the moment as she watched her opponent. Her fingers flexed slightly around the hilt of her bokken, but she made no move to attack. It was as if it had... Oops, I'm actually going to stop there. Because we have an ad popping up in about 35 seconds. I don't want to be reading mid-ad. So, I can stop there. Besides, suspense! Yeah, so I'm going to stop and get a drink here. Okay. Thank you, Rave. Thank you for that stretch. I need that. Okay, that should be starting any second now. Okay. Maybe I lied. Well, it was supposed to be an ad. There it goes. Okay. Okay. It's gonna end in about 30 seconds. Oh my gosh, sorry. And we're back from our ads. Thank you so much for hanging out. I appreciate you guys. And thank you, Wraith, for that stretch. Much appreciated. Alright. Okay. There we go. Sorry, I was trying to build suspense, which is why I stopped right at. Also because, you know, ad timing. I didn't want to be reading in the middle of an ad. Okay, so sorry. It was as if it had been a flash. The student's right hand flew to the grip of his bokken, and soon he had drawn the weapon and swung it in a wide arc as if he would strike at her neck. Marin barely saw the blade move, it had been so fast. She brought her blade up to block as she sidestepped. His strike went wide, and she pressed in, forcing his blade down before she pushed him away with a firm, but not injuring elbow to the chest. The force of the push set his footing off, and he bounced back to recover. He brought his bokken into a guard position and held it for a fraction of a second before he pressed in again with a lateral strike. Marin had been holding her blade in a ready position. She began circling slowly, sweeping her blade low to block the strike before she brought it up in a strike towards his exposed right side. He rolled to his left after the block, barely avoiding her strike, and brought his blade around to catch her across the back if she overextended from her attack. Marin ducked and rolled under the strike, swinging her legs around to knock him off balance before she rolled clear to her feet. A few strands of hair had come loose from her braid and framed her face. She didn't dare take the time to tuck them out of the way. He hit the ground on his back from her sweep, rolling backwards, and assumed a kneeling guard for a moment, before he slowly rose when he saw that she hadn't approached. He smiled out of respect as they circled. No words were needed as he slowly brought his bokken to point away from him and lowered his center of gravity. Hello, Eclipse Raccoon! Welcome in! Welcome to the stream. My name is Meshla. I am primarily an audiobook streamer. I write and read Star Wars fan fiction, and have been doing so for about 25 years. Thank you for that shout out. Appreciate you. And I also play Star Wars Old Republic. And tonight we are reading a story. Let me actually get you the full title. Because if I tell you the short version, people think it's weird. Give me 1 second. So we are reading one of my fanfictions called, it's a Mandalorian phrase, which translates as train your sons to be strong, but train your daughters to be stronger. It is a Mandalorian proverb. It's about a character called Marin. And we are currently on chapter 21. So that's where we're at. Welcome into the stream. It's good to see you. I was trying to find my spot. I had to scroll back up to the top of the screen, so I lost my spot for a second there. So yes, we are currently raising money for Starlight. This is my second day of streaming for Starlight, and we are sitting at $230. And my initial goal was... Oh, sorry. I've been staring at the screen too long. My initial goal was 150, and we kind of blew that out of the water the first night. So thank you, guys, who helped do that. Camera's been a punk. So yeah, $230, and I upped my goal to 500. And to give you an idea of what we're working with here, let me flip screens here a second. So I have an entire list of milestones, several of which that we have actually completed. We also have some incentives. I tried to keep them kind of tailored to what I do with my stream. I spend a lot of time reading and playing Star Wars The Old Republic, so that's where most of my milestones are geared towards. So yeah, some cool stuff. Chat gets to pick a game for me to play. If we reach if we reach $350, I get to create a new SWTOR character. That'll be fun. Chat gets to help me make it. And at $400, if we get that far, I will actually co-author a chapter of a Star Wars fanfiction from someone in chat. And if we reach $450, I will help level somebody's SWTOR character. And if we reach $500, I'll co-author 2 chapters of someone's fanfiction. Because I like to write, okay? Maybe I'm a glutton for punishment, but I love to write, so. Yeah, sorry, my camera likes to be a punk. I honestly wasn't sure what to do for goals, really. Sorry, one sec. I wasn't really sure what to do for goals. Or milestones, because this is actually my first fundraiser, so I had to get a little help. Wasn't really sure what to do for a lot of this stuff. But we really blew my first goal out of the water, so that was really encouraging. And whether we reach the goal or not, the $500 goal, whether we reach it or not, I'm still happy to be doing this, because every dollar we raise is a dollar that goes to help Starlight Children's Foundation, which is really important. So, even if we don't reach our goal. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I might actually recycle the list of milestones and incentives next year. Because it's actually pretty good. So I'm gonna flip back to it for just a second so you can get a real good look at it. I should probably have the list of incentives probably on the side of the screen, but I feel like it would cover chat. So I tried to keep the incentives at like an attainable level, because I know a lot of people don't have lots of money right now. It's kind of the end of the year. You know, a lot of people are trying to save money for Christmas. So I tried to keep a lot of the incentives at an achievable level. So for $1 for me, you can unlock a special Discord role, or you can make me drink water, because I never drink enough. For $3, you can make me check my posture, because again, I'm very bad at slouching. I'm very big here on my channel with self-care, so I'm always talking about self-care. So, you know, making sure everybody's stretching, getting their water, taking their meds if they have those, is really important. You know, for $5, you can make me put a bow in my hair. That's why I'm actually wearing braids today. For $10, you can add 10 minutes to my stream time for the night. For $25, if I'm gaming, you can make me swap either character or loadout. And for $50, you can ask me anything about my stream or my content, anything of that nature. For $75, I will write a one-shot with chat. If you're unfamiliar with what a one-shot is, it is a single scene. Could be connected to the overall current story. It doesn't have to be. It's usually a standalone thing. I know, right? For $100, you can unlock VIP status on my channel for 1 year. So far, I've only had one person do that. And for $150, you can unlock some one-on-one writing coaching. It does not even have to be Star Wars. Even if it's a genre that I'm unfamiliar with, I do try to offer constructive criticism, critiques, you know, methods to help a writer get better, you know, everything that I can. So, I know. You know, when we do hit $300 Wraith, what are you going to do with yourself? You're the one that suggested that one, by the way. Just saying. You were the one that suggested that as a milestone. So, like I said, a lot of my milestones and incentives are directly related to my channel. I'm always a big supporter of self-care and finding ways to manage stress that's healthy. So it's really important to take care of yourself, and I think that kind of raising money for Starlight Children's Foundation is an extension of that. Camera, what are you doing? Camera. I don't know what's going on with my camera. There we go. Sorry, camera is being weird. It does that sometimes. Have a good night, Wraith. Have a good night at work. Yeah, I'm gonna finish reading and then I'll probably head to bed. So. Alright. Oh my goodness, so sorry. Okay. Alrighty. So I am going to get back to reading, but Eclipse Raccoon, if you have any questions about my content or about me as a creator, please feel free to ask and I will answer them when I get a moment. Welcome into the chat, and it's wonderful to see you. Yes. I've looked at some people's incentives or milestones, and I'm just like, yeah, I don't think that I would be doing that. I tried to keep them low key, but things that I could easily achieve, like easily do, like physically, that wouldn't make me feel uncomfortable or make me ill. Some people do being boozled, and I'm not a big fan of being boozled, so. But if that's what you like and you can handle, more power to you. It's just not something that I really have an interest in doing. So I have all story related or gaming related things, all achievable. It's important with milestones, especially it's to celebrate, reaching the goal, of course. But it's important, I think, for me, but also for any creator, anybody who's doing fundraising, to keep them to something that you can easily do, that's not going to make you feel uncomfortable or put you, or put you kind of in an uncomfortable space, whether it's physically, mentally, or emotionally. So keep them achievable and reachable, for sure. I have super chill ones. They're all gaming or reading. Alright. Okay. So we are currently reading chapter 21 of Train Your Daughter, and we're in the middle of a duel. So grab some popcorn, grab a snack, grab some water, and enjoy the ride. Okay. Merritt nodded, recognizing the look. She kept a few meters between them and circled for a moment. His boken was low. She flexed her fingers and then shifted her grip to reverse and crouched slightly, continuing to watch him. He came in fast with his boken low, barely keeping it from dragging on the ground as he closed to range and suddenly swung it upwards. She knew she'd lose her footing if she tried to block. She tracked the blade with her eyes, keeping her blade in a guard position. She then dropped and caught herself at the last instant, sweeping her left foot around to hook his right knee. She seized her boken as he fell, and returned to her feet, gently but firmly tapping him at his trailing leg. Seeing the strike, Jared barely caught himself before giving a victorious shout, but he looked to Bran, who smiled. The student got up and rubbed his left knee for a moment, and nodded before resuming a different guard stance. She spread her feet, assuming a slightly wider stance as well. She held her blade somewhat high, with the blade riding her forearm in a reverse grip, but her stance was low and didn't present much of a profile. She watched her opponent for a moment as she began circling, keeping her left side towards him at all times. She then moved across the grass, her blade somewhat hidden from view. As she drew close, she suddenly brought the blade around, feinting to his left before she swept her blade up and towards his right shoulder. He saw the feint and scooted back as she revealed her true attack. He then brought his blade up to an angle from the ground, but he threw in a surprise. As their blades connected, his left hand went from the grip of his boken to hers and pulled her towards his right. He then brought his blade around and tapped her right arm as she passed. Marin gasped, her eyes widening as he tapped her on the arm. She stumbled past him a couple of steps before gaining her balance. When she turned again, there was a new respect in her eyes. She grinned. So that's how you want to play. She shook her right arm before taking the boken in both hands. Again, she spread her feet, studying his positioning a moment before she moved again, much faster this time. Her blade came in quickly from the right, her offside, sweeping in to connect with his in an audible crack. The blades didn't crack, but she'd put more force behind this strike. The force of it knocked his blade wide, and she moved in, her right hand sweeping down across his wrist as she got in close. She could feel the muscle spasm, but to his credit, he didn't drop the blade. She swept her right hand up, driving it towards where his shoulder met his neck. She connected, but was careful not to put so much force into the strike that it would injure. It did, however, stun him momentarily, and she took the opportunity to tap him firmly across the thigh with the flat of her blade. He rubbed his shoulder several times, rotating his arm to work out the attack she used, and carefully thought out his next move. He nodded softly and started to walk up close, his boken down and relaxed in his hand. She frowned. His stance wasn't aggressive at all. That threw her off. She stood frozen for a moment, as it was the opposite of what had just happened. She kept her blade ready, but didn't move to attack. He suddenly lunged forward, not with the blade of his weapon, but the grip. It caught Marin by surprise, and she moved her blade laterally to knock his aside. At the last moment, he shifted to where blade on blade would contact in a way where he pushed her away from... where he was pushing her away from him, and his forward thrust just missed her neck. There was no actual touch, but it was an understood, killing blow. Marin gasped. She'd fallen for it. She took a few steps back, her eyes wide as she briefly regarded him before she nodded. One strike left. She breathed and settled herself again, looking across at him as if daring him to try that again. He took a moment to collect his thoughts, knowing this was the final one for them, and it could go either way. He took a deep breath, popped his neck, and looked as if he was settling in when he lunged forward, the tip of his blade leading on. Marin reacted without even thinking. She dropped, rolling head over heels away from him, his blade passing mere inches above her. She took up her boken again and flipped over him as he was still extended from the strike. She then landed behind him and turned quickly, throwing him off balance as she settled her knee behind his left and pushed. This caused him to slide to his knees, and in the next instant she had her boken pressed lightly but firmly to his throat. It was his turn to gasp at the suddenness of her response, but it was almost drowned out by the whoop that came from Jared before Mr. Card looked that way to silence him. But he couldn't help but smile himself. Marin hid a smile and pulled her blade away, holding it as if it were sheathed before she offered him her hand to pull him to his feet. When he stood again, she slid her hand up to his forearm until she gripped him in the warrior's grip, and then nodded respectfully. He nodded in return, gripping her arm momentarily before releasing it and bowing, and then turning towards where the colonel waited. She returned the bow and then turned towards where Jared and the others were. She couldn't help the smile that spread across her face when she saw Jared's grin. She walked over to him and climbed back into her saddle. When she was settled, she gently grabbed his arm, stopping him from dismounting. "Just a second," she said, grinning a little. With that, she leaned over and gently kissed his cheek, mindful of her manners in present company. He smiled at Marin's kiss and looked across the field to gauge the other student's attention. He winked at her just before he dismounted, pulled his boken from the saddle, and started walking across the field to see another student walking towards him. He couldn't help but smile as they closed the distance and greeted one another with the warrior's grip. "Kelso," he said as he smiled, "I didn't see you at the festival this year. Is everything all right?" "It was a family affair," Kelso told him. "An older relative close to us had passed." "Oh, my apologies," Jared said with genuine surprise. "I'll be sure to pray for your family. Late, I know, but prayer should be said nonetheless." "I thank you," Kelso said with a smile and a nod. And he meant it. "Did you receive a last kiss from the young lady who visited us last week?" Jared looked back to Marin and couldn't help but grin as he looked back at his opponent. "Aye, we have developed a relationship." "Have you realized who she is?" "I know who she is, and it doesn't matter," Jared told him. "She is a fellow student studying the way like myself, and she walks the path of the Mandalorians." That caused Kelso's eyes to widen in surprise, and it would give him something to tell his fellow student who had just fought her. "Well, shall we?" Jared nodded and backed away before he relaxed his stance and held his boken to his waist like an undrawn sword. Marin watched the two converse momentarily and noted Jared's glance in her direction. Sorry. She faintly sensed that his opponent had said something about her, for she'd seen his look, but it was nothing more than appraising as the master's had been. She gave him the slightest of nods, for she did remember seeing him during their visit. And then the duel began. She moved her mount closer to Koya so they could converse quietly as she kept an eye on the field. His stance was still loose when Kelso drew, and he waited until his opponent was close before pulling his boken backhanded to block the strike. He kept drawing both blades around over their heads and pinning Kelso's down as he moved forward and rolled over to the other side. As soon as he landed, he brought his blade up quickly and struck firmly in Kelso's ribs for the first tap. Marin had to bite her tongue. Instead, she turned to Koya and grinned. Jared was indeed the best swordsman among the students, and it showed. She studied how he moved and saw many elements of his chosen saber form. His movements were efficient and quick. Jared backed away and resumed his relaxed stance with his blade low and slightly pointed to his right. Koya and Tara had settled into what Master Card described as the 6th form, or was it the 5th? She couldn't remember. Marin was well suited for the 4th and had Her Highness personally showing her the techniques. Jared was starting to find his home in the 3rd form. It was defensive, but so quickly could it be turned to attack. As Kelso came in again towards Jared's left, he quickly brought his blade to the left to block with the tip pointed towards the ground. But as soon as they connected, he lunged forward with the tip pointed away and drew the edge along Kelso's neck. But he felt a strike hit his back. It was a draw. We have an ad starting in 4 minutes and 24 seconds. Trying to keep that in mind. Marin gasped. They'd both been tagged. She exchanged a glance with Koya, stealing one towards Master Card. She knew both were skilled, but that wasn't anything she'd expected, and she got the feeling Jared hadn't either. She sent him a brief pulse of encouragement as she settled back in her saddle. Jared grinned at the encouragement and looked over to Kelso. "Very nicely done," he told him as he relaxed his stance again, his blade in a standard guard, but held single-handed, as Kelso came in. The first strike was high and blocked. Second, third, and fourth came in rapid succession, and Jared kept pace with them all before he lunged forward and struck Kelso, not just once in the stomach, but he ducked a counter-strike as he went past him and reflexively struck a second time behind Kelso's shoulder. It was a standard move, and Kelso raised no complaint about the second strike. Neither did his teacher. Marin almost cheered, but she saw Koya grin and shake his head, looking towards Master Card. Marin just grinned. Stefan nodded as he kept looking on. Jared had set up a guard stance with both hands gripping his boken firmly. The two circled for a moment. Jared then brought his blade to point the other way as Kelso assumed a high guard, keeping his left foot towards him. They stayed like that for a moment before Kelso decided to charge. As soon as he was within range and started to bring his blade down, Jared pivoted backward on his right foot, bringing his blade to shoulder level. Still moving, Jared narrowly missed Kelso's boken as he brought his own down right on his attacker's shoulder. The 4th round went to him. One left, Marin thought to herself as she watched the other boy shake out his shoulder. This set of duels was going much quicker than the others, but the two boys had more experience. She turned back to the field, leaning forward slightly. She then pulled her canteen from the back of her saddle and took a long pull before offering it to Koya. They came at each other simultaneously, striking and blocking, counter-striking and blocking again. They spun around for a moment and struck and counter-struck again, but what surprised everyone was that they spun around again with such speed, pulled the same attack, and their bokken struck the other's neck at the same time. Marin's eyes went wide. How in the Manda? She stared, barely stifling a surprised swear. She then exchanged a confused look with Tara and Koya before glancing at Master Card. Stefan saw the strike and only nodded. He was impressed with the opposing school's training. The first two ended in draws. Marin's and Jared's were victories, so it rested on him now. Stefan dismounted from his horse and patted the stallion on the neck several times as Jared walked back to where the group waited. Well done, he said to Jared as he got back to the group. Thank you, Sensei, Jared said as he stood and caught his breath. I noticed that you didn't have a bokken with you as we left the Praxium. He then shifted his and held it at the blade and grip before holding it out to Stefan, with bowing his head. Please, use mine. Stefan nodded and gripped the weapon between his hand. As Jared returned to his mount next to Marin, Stefan started walking the field as he saw Talon waiting. I must admit, Stefan said as he reached his friend, I've been thoroughly impressed by your students. I know Brand's skill to the point it was when I received him. It was good, considering the time we'd spent with you. It has been a fine contest. And a fair one, Talon said as they looked at each other's students. I knew your word was good when you told me in your scroll that your students would be instructed to not use the Force in today's match. That would have tipped the balance in your favor. This way, we all know the quality of their skill. And their instructor. I thank you, Stefan said as he looked towards the plinth and gestured towards it. Shall we, my friend? And we're going to stop there because we're about to be in an ad. But we're getting to the end of the chapter. We're almost there. Fun stuff. So, yes, I write Star Wars fanfiction and have been doing so for 25 years. It's a little scary sometimes when I think about it, but yeah. Alright. Alright, Twitch. You gonna start an ad or what? Maybe? I don't know. Twitch is making a liar out of me. Twitch is making a liar out of me. There we go. Okay. Ad is a great time to get water, have a stretch, get a snack, any of the above, all of the above. Yeah. Okay. Alrighty. Alright, it's gonna end in about 40 seconds. I try not to read during the ads, because And we're back. Yeah, I work really hard to not read during the ads, because then people miss a whole bunch of stuff, so I work really hard to not read during those. Also, I don't know if you could tell, but I did actually dye my hair. It's purple. The lighting is a bit but it is purple, I promise. Alright. Here we go. We're almost done with this chapter. We're going to go a little bit past 10, but I'm making up for not going past 10 on Sunday. So. Here we go. Let us begin. Marin watched with interest as Jared presented his bokken to Stefan. She'd noticed that he had not brought one as well. Her gaze followed Stefan as he moved out onto the field before she immediately turned her attention to Jared, hugging him roughly after he mounted his horse. She caught Koya's grin before they all turned to watch the final duel. A hush settled over those assembled, as if all were holding their breath in anticipation. The skill of both masters bordered on legendary, at least among their students. "The same rules apply to our duel, then?" Talon asked as they stopped. "Of course," Stefan said. The answer was a trigger, and he knew it, for Talon swung out against him instantly. Stefan brought his blade up and blocked the first strike. The colonel then went for a lunge from the block, and Stefan shifted to his left, avoiding the thrust, and then pushed the other's blade away. He brought his up for a strike and was blocked as the colonel came around in an upper block. He moved to try to bat Stefan's blade down, but the Jedi had already pulled back, lunged forward, and caught his blade between Talon's arms as he turned slightly, and sawed his blade back and forth. It would have meant a lost arm for the colonel if it were real, so it was a victory for the Jedi. Marin exchanged a look with the others. The speed at which the two men moved was incredible, especially given that Master Card was not relying on the Force. She remembered then that he had trained in the way of the sword from a very young age, probably close to the age she'd been when Jerry's had started her training. She clenched her fist in her lap, but somehow restrained herself from shouting. Something told her that this match meant a lot to both of them. Talon didn't hesitate to come at him again, low to his right, to aim for Stefan's hip. Stefan blocked with the tip of his bokken pointed down and away from him. When they connected, Stefan started to lunge forward with his grip reversed, but Talon kept his blade in contact to keep the strike from touching him. They separated and then lunged again. Stefan blocked a strike to his right and then spun in that direction, which pushed the colonel off balance and allowed him to strike the colonel behind the shoulder. 2 for Master Card. 3 strikes remain, Marin thought, as she watched the duel in contemplative silence. She was studying how both men moved, almost in concert with one another. She could tell that Koya and Jared couldn't tear their gazes away either. This time, it was Stefan who pressed the attack. In the short time it took the colonel to turn around, he had to instantly bring his blade up to block Stefan's overhead strike. He lowered it to counter, but had to raise it again at an angle to deflect a second strike. He ducked under and to his right as he prepared to draw his blade across, but Stefan shifted with him and started to bring both of their blades towards the ground. Talon guessed what the next move would have been and backed up before Stefan could move. The Jedi stumbled slightly, but raised his blade through a wide arc to bat the counter-strike away. He then lunged forward and put his shoulder into the colonel. They both fell, but Stefan rolled with the momentum and was up on his knees, swinging around to catch the colonel in the upper thigh as he tried to move in for a strike. Marin gasped and heard a faint exclamation from Jared as well. She almost hadn't seen it had happened so fast, but then she grinned. So, he's not all about the sword, he can play rough too. She looked towards Jared and saw him nod. Perhaps I shall compare notes with Master Card, she told herself silently. Stefan came forward again, but the colonel sidestepped and gripped his tunic to throw him to the ground. Stefan's left hand went to the colonel's wrist, and he applied pressure to force the colonel to release his weapon. He raised the arm high and then went under, throwing the colonel over his shoulder. Talon landed with a loud oomph, but when Stefan closed in, he brought his blade up at the last moment, and Stefan walked right into it. Stefan couldn't help but laugh as he backed up. I sort of expected that, he said as he rubbed the spot on his stomach. Usually he would have. Dueling the colonel with his senses closed down was actually refreshing. Marin's eyes narrowed. She knew it had to be challenging to duel someone when you were used to relying on the Force, but it also presented a challenge. It forced you to approach things differently and to be more physically aware. She grinned, her respect for the colonel going up a bit. He wasn't playing dirty, just using all of his skills. They both were. Talon rolled and knelt for a moment before he stood up, relaxed this time. "I've been asking myself this for many years," he said as he regarded Stefan. "Every time we've practiced against each other, you've always made a point to shut down your connection." "I have," Stefan said as they stood there, regarding each other. "It would be an unfair advantage, as you said. But there's always been this curiosity in me," the colonel said as he walked up. So they were closer. How fast would it have gone if you didn't limit yourself that way? Stefan only looked at him. "It would not be right to do so, my friend." "Come on," Talon said with a grin. "I may regret it, but this day is yours anyway. For an old friend, please." Sorry. Marin couldn't quite make out what they were saying, but she caught the gist of it from the colonel's emotions. Her eyebrows went up in surprise, and momentarily she wondered if anyone else had noticed. She glanced at Koya and Bran to see if they had. "I don't believe it," Jared whispered as he looked at the two of them. "What is it?" Bran asked. Marin laughed softly, glancing sideways along the line of MasterCard's students. "Well, this is about to get interesting." "He's asked MasterCard to take the gloves off," Jared said in amazement. Stefan closed his eyes and opened himself up fully to the Force. It was as if the floodgates had been opened. He could feel the energy swirling around him. He could sense the response of his students, the colonels, and his school across the field. Every tree, every animal, even the spirits of those who had fought on this field eons ago. Marin traded a look with Jared, her eyes wide in surprise. "Did you feel that?" she asked, her mental tone odd. "It's Gandosala." She knew what MasterCard's presence felt like, but this was him, and yet not at the same time. She stared across the field at the two men, her mind filled with wonder. "How is this possible?" she asked Jared quietly. She'd never felt his presence quite like this. It was as if he kept himself closed off somewhat. She frowned, remembering what Andrew had said about him being a practitioner of the seventh form. She said it was about release, holding nothing back. Stefan opened his eyes and looked towards Talon, who had backed up when he'd seen Stefan's eyes. They seemed to have a pale glow to them now. "Are you still certain of this, Colonel?" Stefan asked one last time. Talon raised his boken to the guard stance he usually used. He wasn't going to back down from his request now. "Whenever you are, Master Jedi." The result was so fast that he hardly would have believed it. In a moment, Stefan had slammed his boken against the colonel's and drove them both in that direction of travel. Before he could strike, Talon's weapon hit nothing but air, and he felt himself get tapped twice on the back. Turning to counter again, he saw Stefan against the plinth actually launching off of it against him. He barely brought his boken up to a vertical block. Stefan's blow came in with such power that it shattered the wooden blades on both weapons. Talon's eyes widened as he looked at the broken remains of his weapon in his strong hand and turned around. Stefan was kneeling on the ground, still holding what was left of his boken in his strong hand. It was a moment before Stefan slowly began to stand and leaned his head back as he took a deep breath. There we go. When he turned around, his eyes were normal, and Talon couldn't help but regard him with new respect. "Master Jedi," he said to Stefan as he walked up, "I am indeed impressed. The match is yours." Marin gasped and glanced at Jared, Bran, and Koya. She spotted Dylan astride his horse as he held the reins for Stefan's mount. The older boy was grinning. She caught his eye, hoping he would pick up on her curiosity. Sorry. She had to know, but it could wait until after things had concluded. She felt a brief pang, wishing Jarius had been able to see it. She'd have to tell him about it, and they could visit the Colonel next week. She turned an eye to the field again, just as she saw the two men grasp each other in the warrior's grip before they bowed. Stefan walked slowly to the rest of them, taking the reins from Dylan and climbing onto his horse before he turned and rode towards the rest of the students. He looked at each of them and nodded softly. Jared, my apologies for destroying your boken. There are more to be made, my master, Jared said, with a deep bow of respect. My students, Stefan said. The match is ours. It started with a few students, but more and more shouted a victory yell as they raised their hands high. Stefan barely stopped himself from it, but he grinned nonetheless at their enthusiasm. Marin thrust her fist into the air, a grin spreading across her face. Oh yeah! She knew Stefan knew the meaning of it, and she gazed across at him with a new level of respect. He waited until the cheers died down and everyone was settled. With me, he said as he started to lead his horse off the field. Dylan lined up behind him and to the left while Jared went to his right, the rest of the students lining behind them. Marin guided her mount behind Jared's. She looked behind them one last time, her gaze connecting with the Colonel's for a moment as she nodded in respect. She'd have to find some time to talk to him. It was a long moment before she faced forward again and twitched her reins to catch up. And that is the end of chapter 21. Okay. I'm super late on stream, but that's okay. Yeah. So fun times. Alrighty. So it is 10:20. Give me 1 second. Gonna go look in the I'm looking for somebody to read. Let's see. Give me just a second. Oh, sorry. Ooh. Okay. We're gonna go say hi to Prophet DNA. He's streaming for Starlight as well. He's currently playing Fortnite. He's also a member of Survivor Squad, which is the community that I am part of. Give me just 1 second while I get this raid set up. I would greatly appreciate if all of you guys could hang around for that raid and help show some support for Prophet DNA, who is also raising money for Starlight. This first raid message is for anybody who is subscribed to the channel. And then the second one is for anybody who is following the channel. Feel free, or just kind of hang out. Feel free to grab whichever one works for you. And I would greatly appreciate if you could follow me around on the raid. So I'm gonna get this raid set up. Give me a second. Thank you so much for everybody who is here this evening. I greatly appreciate you. And I will see you you on the next stream, which is going to be Friday. We'll be playing some SWTOR. I hope to see you there. Have a great night.
Oh my gosh. Thank you guys.
That was so kind of you guys.